All right. Stuart, we'll kick it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Jen. And good morning, everyone. Although I realize these days we have people in many different time zones, so it may actually not be morning in some places. So good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Yes, and hi, even from Italy. Wonderful to see you from Italy. This is one of my favorite days when we all gather together here as a community. It's wonderful to scroll through here and see all the faces here, familiar faces, new faces. We have a jam-packed and exciting day for you all. I want to thank in advance Jen and Sasha on our certification team, but many other staff members who've worked very hard, as you'll see, to put together a chock-full day of exciting stuff. And I'm thrilled that Dr. Stephen Porges is going to be joining us as well. So to kick things off, I just want us to take a moment here to recognize the growth of our community here. You'll see in this graphic that we've added a bunch of people in the United States, 39 folks. We're up to 265 folks certified in the United States. We added 3 people in Canada, up to 20 there. But Australia is rapidly gaining. 6 folks have joined the certified community all the way. You got to make sure your eye goes down and to the right there to see Australia. And yes, newly certified folks in England, Ireland, and Italy. Very exciting to see the growth here. And, you know, when I talk about the certified community to folks, I always point out to people that we are unapologetic about the fact that getting certified in collaborative problem solving is no quick and easy thing. It is intensive. And we're not apologetic because we really feel strongly that when people are certified in this approach, we want them to be not just passionate, not just champions, but real experts in practicing the model and experts in teaching and sharing it. And it's a high bar. And we know that you all know that, and all the time and energy and resources that have gone into you becoming a part of this community. So when we see growth like this, we know what it means as the community members here and what all these folks have done to join the community. So very exciting. Perhaps even more exciting is in this last fiscal year, everything that this community together accomplished. Pretty amazing when you think that community members conducted 76 different introductory trainings around the world, 150 essential foundations training. And folks know that's our new language for level 1, previously tier 1 trainings. Again, intensive trainings, 150 of those conducted, 60 parent classes. So our best estimate is that's reached about 6,136 adults who serve youth. And if we extrapolate our best job we can do with that out from there, it means that this community has shared collaborative problem solving deeply with almost 250,000 kids and families in this past fiscal year. So that is amazing reach. And frankly, it also doesn't account for the folks that the community members here directly work with. So you all, in addition, throughout the course of the year, we estimate work with probably touch the lives of about another 12,000 youth and families directly through your day-to-day activities. So that pushes us over 250,000 kids and families reached. And that's pretty remarkable reach. So I want to celebrate everything that the community has done together. It's incredible to see, and it's a good jumping off point for the next discussion, which is where we're headed, because I love to say that we're solving the problem by reaching 250,000 kids and families a year, but we all know that the problem in front of us is immense, and with all that reach, we're really just scratching the surface. So with that in mind, I want to talk for a few minutes with Naomi Kesher, who's our Director of Operations, about our strategic planning process. Strategic planning has served us as an organization very well over the years, since the early 2000s when this program was funded. We are sort of 3 strategic plans in at this point. And we are on the cusp of initiating our next strategic plan. We are literally putting the finishing touches on it now. And when you look back in time through the founding of the program, the development of it, trying to optimize how we go about the work, we are at an exciting place now that has to do with scaling the work. It really has to do with how do we have the maximum impact we can have in scaling this collective work to reach significantly more youth, given limited resources. And I have to say, I'm always very proud of the fact that one of our original funders used to tell, who was a renowned businessman and started Staples. He used to go around telling people that there's no better dollar spent than a dollar given to Think Kids, because what we are able to accomplish with $1 is striking, is remarkable. So with limited resources, what we want to do is we want to try to reach even more kids and families. Now, how are we going to do that, and how many kids and families are we hoping to reach together? We're going to go into some of the details quickly here, and I will turn this over to Naomi, who's going to talk about who we're going to be focused on, where we're going to be doing the work, and what outcomes we're looking for as well. Naomi.
Hi, it's so good to see all of you. As Stuart said, this is like one of the best days of the year at Think Kids. It's so nice to see this community who's out there doing really hard work all the time to help all these kids. I want to, before I jump in, acknowledge, Justin, your question in the chat. And because I'm about to talk about how we're focusing our energy over the next 5 years and where we're focusing, that does not mean we are excluding and not working with people who fall outside of this realm, including adults. The work that you all do with adults is equally important and having equal amounts of impact. It's just a question of, as Stuart said, with our limited resources, where is our primary focus? But it does not exclude other work that's happening beyond this. So with that caveat in mind, as we sort of stepped back and did some reflecting on, okay, over the next 5 years, given where we are, given who we are as an organization, where do we want our efforts to focus? The good news is there's not a huge change. We want to continue to serve youth whose neurocognitive skills keep them from meeting expectations of adults. There's potentially a slightly different focus for the younger kids and the older kids, in that with younger kids, we have the opportunity for some prevention and earlier intervention. But in general, that's who we're trying to reach. That's who we're trying to impact. And I think the big change for us as we look at the next 5 years is really trying to focus on organizations and individuals who represent youth from historically marginalized communities, and recognizing the chronic stress and trauma that comes along often with being part of those communities, and the impact that has, and wanting to make sure that we are doing what we can to really reach those kids who often also just don't have as much access to resources and supports, and how can we fill some of that gap. So really, again, not excluding other organizations, not excluding other individuals, but really trying to make sure that our work is accessible specifically for this population, and that we aren't missing them in our work. And as per usual, we are still continue trying to work on increasing youth success and meeting other people's expectations, improving adult relationships between adults and peers, reducing the use of punitive and harmful strategies, and reducing challenging behaviors. All the things that we try to accomplish with CPS, we continue to try to achieve as we work towards this next strategic plan. And in terms of how, Stuart, if you want to advance, how we think about the next 5 years, we realized we really wanted to push ourselves to set a big goal, an audacious goal for ourselves of doubling our impact over the next 5 years. So if right now we estimate that collectively between us and you all, we're reaching about 1 million youth per year, how can we double that to 2.5 million youth over the next 5 years? How can we really continue to reach and try to bite off an even bigger portion of the challenge that is being faced in the world, especially in youth mental health? And how exactly we're going to get there, I will turn that back to Stuart.
All right, thanks, Naomi. So obviously, again, really proud of the incredible reach that we have at this point with limited resources, but the need is huge. We all here are aware that challenging behavior, concerning behavior is literally the canary in the coal mine when it comes to later mental health challenges. And, we have a youth mental health crisis, and not just a youth mental health crisis. We have an adult mental health crisis on our hands right now. So the need is massive, and there's a great opportunity for us to be a part of the solution. But we really need to work harder to get our work out to many, many more people. So here is a list of 4 primary initiatives that we want to focus on over the next 5 years together to try to reach many more kids, families, adults. What does that look like? Number 1, it looks like expanding awareness of collaborative problem solving. We reach a lot of people, but man, are they outnumbered by the folks who have absolutely no idea what collaborative problem solving is. So we want to expand awareness to people who are not in our network and cultivate interest in engaging more and learning about the approach. We've got to get these ideas out there to a much wider audience. So that's sort of top of the funnel, if you will. But then the second initiative has to do with increasing learner engagement. Because you all know that, we have a training continuum, but what we don't do a great job of, unless people are sort of engaging deeply, for instance, as an whole organization, is we don't do a great job of helping connect people in between training so that they continue to get feedback, to learn, to sustain their practice, and to want to move forward with the rest of the continuum. So, a lot of people do introductory training and don't go onto level 1. A lot go level 1, not onto level 2, et cetera. We think we can do a better job with what we're referring to sort of connective tissue in between training to support people better, to engage people better. And we think one of the outcomes of that will the more people will want to proceed throughout the continuum, which will result in growing the certified community as well. Number 3, a big one, and one that I think is going to be of particular interest to the community, is this community represents an incredible opportunity to affect the lives of so many kids and families. The fact that we have this massive group of passionate experts in the model. We want to grow this group for sure, but the other thing we want to do is we want to do a better job of empowering you all and supporting you all to increase your impact, your reach within your own communities. We think there is a lot we can do. We've tried to listen to a lot of ideas from folks and are going to be doing more of that in the near future to try to see how we can do a better job supporting you all in this work. And frankly, having community members do the work, spread the approach within their own communities, that's the most effective way to do it anyways, because y'all know your communities. You are the credible messengers in your communities. And we want to double down on empowering and supporting you all to be able to do much more and much more effectively that you so desire. Finally, we think our work with organizations is a great way to reach many kids, many families, many adults. Well, we need to make that work much more accessible, and particularly for organizations who are serving the types of populations, historically marginalized populations that we want to reach. Particularly, those organizations need our help accessing collaborative problem solving. It has to be made more accessible in terms of the need for time, resources, feeling like a cultural fit. There's so many ways that we need to make the work more accessible to organizations. And the good news is we think we've honed in on the critical components to effective implementation in systems, in organizations. And we think there's ways to make those a lot more scalable and accessible. So over the next 5 years, that's what we're going to be focusing on. I know for me personally, as the director of the program, when we finish a strategic plan, I like to print out a high-level summary of it and stick it right on the corner of my monitor, because when we make decisions about what we want to do and how we want to do it, I'm always going back to that. Is this going to help us expand awareness of this to more people? Are we going to do a better job of engaging and sustaining practice? Are we doing a better job of empowering and supporting this community? And are we making this more accessible for organizations? That's going to be at the heart of our work together over the next 5 years. And I hope that you all are going to be as excited as we are about how you can take advantage of these supports to be able to maximize impact in ways that you might be interested in doing in your communities. All right. I'm going to turn things over to Jen, who is going to handle a number of announcements and reminders before we get going with the formal parts of the program today. But I hope it was helpful for people to get a little bit of a sneak peek of where we're headed over the next 5 years.
Thanks, Stuart. All right, so a few quick announcements and reminders before we dive into the rest of the program. I think as we continue to grow, I think it's really important for me to reintroduce your support team for membership. So Stuart, if you want to click to the next slide there. So I just wanted to put a face to the names, because I know that we always say email us, and I just want you to know who we are. So Sasha and I are available to assist with any questions that you may have about your membership. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help you. If you do have any specific questions about your renewal, please email those to Sasha instead of in the chat window today, just so we don't lose track of it. And so we can get an answer back to you ASAP. If you want to go to the next one, Stuart. All right, so today we're going to try something new. We're going to try the Q&A feature for like formal questions for presenters or for the support team. And then we're going to use the chat window for just some general discussion. So this is new for us. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A button and the chat button. So if you want to pull both of those up and kind of have those up throughout the conference, that's what we're hoping to use, and we'll see how that goes and if we will be using it again in the future. And you can skip to the next one. All right, a lot of you have been asking, how do I renew my certification this year? So the first is attend the conference, which you are all doing. And then you'll need to pay your certification renewal fee on your anniversary date. We do have financial support available and a new payment plan program available. So if you're interested in either of those, please reach out and we can get you set up with those. And you will also need to attend or watch the required webinars, which I will show you in a moment. And then in December, we're going to send out a contract and a policy and procedures acknowledgement form. You'll just need to sign both of those by January 1st. So nothing's gone out yet. We'll send those out in December, and you'll need to sign by January 1st. And this information is in the newsletter and in the handouts that were sent out as well. All right. A few other important reminders. It's important that you communicate to Think Kids about all CPS services that you're providing, whether it's internal to your organization or external. This helps us to keep an up-to-date database, but it also helps us to report out on youth served, like you saw earlier in Stuart's presentation. Also, please be sure to be using the latest curriculum. We're actively updating all materials with the required MGB branding. Additionally, we are reviewing all images and videos to be sure that we are not infringing on any copyright laws. So we will be sharing more specifics about criteria for changes that can be made to the curriculum to meet the needs of particular populations in December, but we just wanted to plug, please be using the latest versions that are on the hub. We sent out a request to update your contact information last week. We got a great response to that. Even if your contact information hasn't changed, we're updating our tracking system. So if you could complete that, we would greatly appreciate it. And this is just a final reminder about the CPS evaluation link. We sent out a new link over the summer The old link is being retired next week, so make sure that you're using the latest version of that evaluation link. All right. So on the screen, you'll see upcoming events. The ones listed under required, there's a new one listed that's different from the newsletter and your handouts. It's the December 6th webinar. We've changed the focus of this webinar to be more of a general curriculum update webinar. And like I said before, we plan to share information on how to make changes to that curriculum to meet the needs of particular populations. So make sure you mark your calendars for December 6th, as well as the other dates listed there. The webinars this year are really focused around our curriculum, and our hope is that we provide support to you all in delivering the curriculum and keep you informed as to changes to the curriculum. You'll also see some optional webinars listed there as well. We're hoping that the March one is tied to Initiative 3 and gathering some information from all of you on how we can support and empower you in your certification. And then in May, we are going to be continuing a series that we're starting today on CPS implementation. And on May, we're going to be focusing on sustainability. And today we are going to focus on fidelity, which is a great segue to our next session. So I'm going to hand things over to Hallie and Elizabeth. If you have any questions on any of those announcements, just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Wow, Elizabeth, that was fast. Oh, that was you, Jen, with your slides. Elizabeth's going to get our slides up for our next section, but I thought maybe Elizabeth and I could start off by introducing ourselves. We're really excited today to talk about a component of implementation and share with you a tool that we've been working on over the course of the last year that we think will be really, really helpful for all of you in your own CPS practice and your work in supporting others with CPS. So my name is Hallie Carpenter. I'm one of the trainers and consultants here at Think Kids. And my other half of my time is a role spent in being the manager of implementation. So I get to really dive deeply into all aspects of implementation and think about how we can really support people to implement collaborative problem solving in really deep and good ways. And Elizabeth has been my thought partner in implementation and been doing a lot of this work with me. So she's here to share some of this work that we've done. So Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Buchholz. And like Hallie mentioned, we've been working really hard on implementation support. And most of my experiences in residential treatment and in grad school, I focused on implementation science and trauma-informed care. So it's really important to me to make sure that when organizations are using CPS, that they're using it well and that we're getting the intended outcomes that we want to see. And we know from all the research in implementation science and just practical application of teaching people that we can talk about CPS a lot, and that doesn't mean that, you know, staff will actually use it. People will use it. So that's our goal, is to really bridge that gap from knowledge to action. So we're really excited to share this with you today.
So this is the first part of a series of webinars that we're going to do over the course of this year, because what we have seen in the feedback from all of you in the certified community is that more information about implementation would be helpful. So that's our goal. And when we think about broadly about implementation, we know that we have a pretty diverse certified community of people here who work with families, who work in foster care, work with adults, work in schools, work in residential, outpatient. There's a wide range of the ways in which people do this type of work with collaborative problem solving. And implementation really applies across all of those things, because implementation is about getting this concept and this practice of collaborative problem solving and getting people to change their behavior to use it and to integrate it into the things that they do day to day. So our first topic that we're going to talk about today is fidelity. And when I bring up that term fidelity, just think in your mind, what's the first thing that comes to your mind about what you think about when I say fidelity? And go ahead and put that in the chat window. Consistency, accuracy, staying true to the model, doing it well, adherence, faithful, best practice. Yeah, doing it right. I like that. That's a really simple way of making this come across with authenticity, best practice. Yeah, so a lot of themes that you're talking about are, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about fidelity. And we really want people to do CPS well, because that's going to lead to positive impacts for the people that we're doing collaborative problem solving with. So today, what we're going to talk about is talk about a little bit about how fidelity supports good implementation. We're going to share with you a tool that we created called the CPS rubric. Some of you who have been through certification in the most recent cohorts have had an opportunity to use the CPS rubric in certification. That's kind of how we started piloting it. And then we're going to give all of you an opportunity to explore and look at the rubric and discuss what it's like in your small groups. Please know that this is the first conversation about the rubric. And then when we meet again in January around coaching and supporting others to use CPS, we are going to fold the rubric work into that session as well. So we'll have an opportunity to, if you have questions that come up today, or questions as you are using the rubric and playing around with it and testing it out in the next few months, that we can bring some of those things to better support you to use it in our January session. So this is not the only conversation we're going to have about the CPS rubric. Okay. This is a slide that we're using as a grounding slide when we think about kind of simplifying a definition of what implementation is. And I say simplifying, but then you see like how many points on this slide in front of you, right? But if we think about just in general what implementation is, it's at first identifying that there's some type of problem that needs solving. Very true to the CPS language right there. So it might be that you're a parent and you're recognizing with your children that your children are having some type of challenge and you're maybe not able to meet their needs. So there's some type of problem that we want to solve. In schools, there might be some problem that we're seeing with challenging behavior or things happening, or we feel like we're not really meeting the needs of the kids. And so there's a problem that we're identifying and solving. And so that can happen across different settings that we work in. And what we do typically then is that we identify this problem and then we choose something that will solve that problem. So in this case, we're saying that collaborative problem solving is a thing that is going to work to solve an identified problem. Then we go through a process where we assess, gosh, how ready are we to take this on? Right? What work is it going to take? What time is it going to take? Are our staff in the place where their stress level is a manageable place where they can take on something new and learn something new to work on solving this type of problem? And then we go through a process where we teach people how to use the thing that's going to help solve that problem. So we're going to teach people how to use collaborative problem solving. We're going to then support them to do it well. And then we're going to measure how well are people using collaborative problem solving. So does it mean when they say, I'm doing a plan B, are they actually doing a plan B, or are they doing a nice plan A? And then we also then evaluate how well collaborative problem solving is working to solve that problem. So what outcomes are we seeing as a result of using this new practice in our day-to-day, or from a large system, or from individuals, or in a small kind of group or family? So you can see that we've bolded and made bigger 3 components of this: the teaching, the supporting, and the measuring how well people are doing it. That's the focus of our rubric, and that's the focus of where we think about fidelity. That's where it fits into this kind of sequence and process of implementation. And so we're going to touch on all of those points today when we talk about this new tool, the CPS rubric. When we're thinking about kind of some of our goals around implementation, there can be goals that are unique to an organization or unique to a group of people who are trying to use CPS. So what are in the places that you work, what are common outcomes that you are hoping to see or that you are seeing by using collaborative problem solving? Go ahead and put some of those in the chat window. Yeah, ensuring that there's increased voice for the people that we work with, increased empathy, improved skills and strengthened relationships, decreases in challenging behavior, wanting people to learn new skills. Yep, I see trust added in there. Specifically, emotion regulation, executive function, helping with behavior at home, improved attendance, parents feeling more confident, increased regulation. Look at all these amazing things that collaborative problem solving can achieve, right? And this is why I think we feel excited about and keeps us going to continue to do this work when the work gets pretty hard, right? When we're working with families and kids who are having challenges. I see also like teacher burnout, adult regulation increases, yeah, fewer disruptions and hospitalizations. So these are all, when we think about like positive impact of collaborative problem solving. To be able to get to that positive impact of collaborative problem solving, we need to do collaborative problem solving well, right? We need to do it in a way that is true to the model and true to what we're doing. And we also need to sustain that, meaning that we need to kind of keep using it as it's intended, but also adapting it to meet the needs of the organization, right? I work a lot with schools, and I was actually just in a training yesterday with a bunch of school staff, and the teachers were like, how do I find the time to be able to do this with my students? I see the importance of it and I really want to do it. And so we were having a lot of conversations about how they adapt it to the specific needs of that organization or to their setting, but still stay true to empathizing with youth, sharing their concerns, collaboratively working on coming up with solutions, and viewing all of those kids in their class through a skill, not will mindset, right? So can we do CPS well? And can we continue to see it work day in, day out, and adapt it to the needs that we see in our settings or with families that we're working with? And that's going to lead to positive impacts of CPS. So we can see that fidelity is a key component, an important component of implementation. At Think Kids, when we're working with different organizations, we really see training, coaching, and certification as key components of supporting that CPS fidelity. And likewise, for all of you out doing your work with your communities, these are the same types of things that we see. We're teaching people collaborative problem solving, we're coaching, and really we can think about coaching as supporting them to continue to develop and use their skills and do it well. And then you're maintaining your expertise in CPS so you can continue to do this really good work in the communities in which you do that work. So we started to have quite a few conversations. I can think back to, we had an internal journal club meeting where we were reviewing a journal article about people's ability to self-reflect on their own skills when they're using all sorts of different types of things. And what the article was saying is that people actually aren't very good at self-reflecting or assessing whether their skills are, strong or where they need to develop. And so that led to some conversations internally about, wow, maybe sometimes people don't understand because there's not a map of where they are now in their skills and where they can go. And so we decided to create a CPS rubric to help support people to understand the developmental progression of CPS skills. And so our goals in working to create this tool was that it could be used in all sorts of different types of ways of supporting people to grow in their fidelity of CPS. And the key here is that we didn't want this tool to feel like it was like punitive or evaluative, that it really felt like a support tool and that it's normal for people's skills to develop in certain ways based on what we've seen from our work with people. So we wanted to show a developmental progression of CPS skills and provide some really concrete examples of important skills to master to do CPS well. We also wanted to identify, hey, what can high fidelity CPS look like and sound like? Those of you who work in different organizations, sometimes you talk about having really clear expectations about what something looks like and sounds like to meet that expectation. And that's kind of what we were thinking right here. And we really wanted to help individuals better understand their own CPS development and how to continue to develop their skills. Like, where am I now? Where are my strengths? Where are areas I can work on? And then what can I do to help move my practice forward? And then we also wanted to make sure that this was a tool that we could integrate across the training continuum. And Elizabeth is going to talk about how we're currently doing that now and what our goals are to work towards that in the future. And this is really to help us better understand, what does typical CPS fidelity and development look like after someone goes to a level 1 essential foundations training? What are their skills like after they attend level 2 advanced concepts? And then what do we expect for their skill level after certification? And so this can lead to really improving the ways in which we support people in their growth. All right, let's go to the next slide, Elizabeth. We also wanted to make sure that this tool felt efficient and effective to providing feedback to others. So it can be a great, like within the context of a supervisory relationship or coaching, certified person supporting others, a really like simple way to provide feedback that's really clear to the person that we're providing feedback to. So we found a little bit of information too, that rubrics are really helpful tools for decreasing ambiguity and the role of implicit bias when we're providing feedback to others. And so we wanted to really make sure that we were doing that. And creating something that can also be used to monitor fidelity when examining like CPS documentation. So when looking at CPS APTs, Plan B organizers, if you're using that as a way to kind of check your fidelity at an organization level, then that could be a helpful tool. Within our own work for certification, it's really helped us simplify feedback for certification applications, work sample submissions, as well as being used in coaching. And get that muted. And then another goal was to help people improve their CPS skills more quickly. So can we get them to a place where people are experts more quickly? And really, this is all grounded on this idea of growth mindset, that everybody can learn these skills. Everybody is growing in their CPS skills, and we're here to support them by using this rubric tool. All right, Elizabeth, your turn.
Okay, so let's talk about like what's on the rubric, kind of how we thought about designing it, the work that went into that, and how we've used it over the past few months. So what we did is we took, all of the components of using CPS. So from assessment, planning, the organizer, the intervention, and then kind of what's important about the overall approach, and broke that out section by section. And the intention behind that is so that if you're only giving feedback on someone's APT, you can just use that section of the rubric to support giving that feedback. So we wanted people to have clear like guidelines about, what are we working on, and what does that look like in action? And it provides descriptions based on this kind of 4-point, we hesitate to use the word scale. It's like 4-point progression of skills. Again, to show what it looks like and sounds like at each developmental level. And there are sections on there for people to self-reflect and for you to support them in providing feedback. So a 1 would be like after level 1, what kinds of skills are we seeing? 2 is after level 2, what are we seeing? 3 is where we're hoping people will be at the point of applying for certification. And 4 is really where we want you to be after certification. So exemplary skills in collaborative problem solving. And as you're looking at the rubric, you'll notice that some of the categories are like weighted heavier. So they have a higher point scale. They go from 2 to 8 or even 3 to 12. And that's based on what we feel like are the most important things about collaborative problem solving. As you all know, Plan Bs are super nuanced. There's lots of different components. And we want people to know exactly what that looks like. And there are some key things that hinge like the success of your Plan B on. And one of those is, you know, specificity of problems to solve. So if we know if people have really good specific problems to solve, that can pave the way for easier Plan Bs in the future. So that one's weighted a little bit heavier than some of the other skills like assessing challenging behaviors. And as we're thinking about this, we have one rubric that includes like all the components of collaborative problem solving, like everything from assessment to planning to organizer to intervention. And we have one that's simplified. So those are what we feel like are the most essential components, because as people are first learning about CPS, we don't want them to be overwhelmed to be like, oh my gosh, I have to be good at all of these things, right? So we have a more simplified version that are really those essential components. And that's called the short form rubric. And it doesn't have weighted scoring. So everything's kind of weighted the same again, because those are the most essential components. So you can use the whole rubric. You can just use certain sections based on what you're providing feedback on. And we feel like that can be less overwhelming, again, as people are first learning. So how are we using the rubric internally at Think Kids right now? And kind of what are our goals for the future? So right now, we've incorporated the rubric into the short form rubric into level 2 training. And it's in the workbook. So people can start to practice using it in level 2, hopefully to prepare them to go into certification. And actually, I think that's not the short form, that's the long form. We're planning on including the short form rubric into level 1. We're not using it in training yet. We still have some testing to do. We would love feedback from you all as you're starting to use this and work with it about how, you know, it's working out in your communities and in your settings. So we're determining how to incorporate that rubric to match the learning outcomes that we have for level 1. As many of you all know, we provide coaching to organizations that are going through implementation. So we started using the rubric in those coaching sessions in small groups. And the goal of coaching, again, is to build people's skills and help them understand CPS and improve their fidelity. So our hope is that by using the rubric, they're going to use CPS more frequently. They're going to feel more confident. It aligns with the idea that people do well if they can, and it provides a pathway for them to move forward in their skills. And again, a better understanding of CPS and the ability to kind of reflect, self-reflect on what's going on for them. So in level 1 coaching, so that's the coaching we provide after a level 1 training, we're not using the rubric yet, and we have plans for how to use the simplified or short form rubric in the future. In level 2 coaching, we're currently using this. We expect people in level 2 coaching to submit some work samples for us to provide feedback on, and give them the opportunity to practice that self-reflection piece, because we know that that's a skill, just like any of the other CPS skills, as Hallie mentioned earlier. So we expect people to submit, you know, an assessment, and then we expect them to submit the rubric with some self-reflection. And then the coach provides feedback on the rubric as well, based on what they're seeing. So it's incorporated throughout level 2 coaching into those sessions and learning activities. Like I mentioned before, we expect people to have an average score of a 3 across all areas when they're applying for certification. So it gives us a really nice like starting place for people, and an opportunity to provide feedback on specific things, but that level 3 is where we want people going into certification so they can get the most out of certification, and everybody's on a similar, kind of level in terms of their learning. And then through the work sample submissions, we're having people turn in rubrics with every submission in certification. Our hope is by the end of the second or third submission, work sample submission and certification, that there's an average score of 4 across all areas. So again, it gives people a nice roadmap of what we're looking for and an opportunity to explain in that self-reflection piece, like why they rated themselves the way that they did and what went into that and all the factors. So what are we seeing now that we've been using this in certification, in coaching, over the past several months? Kind of what are the outcomes that we've noticed? So one of the biggest pieces of this, I think, and what I've experienced in certification, is that feedback is provided in a really relational way. So when I've read through people's rubrics, I really understand like how they're thinking about CPS, what went into they decided to plan A this versus plan C this, all of the cultural factors that are, impacted the way that people use CPS. And so we're able to have a discussion about like kind of where they felt like they are, where I feel like they are, what kinds of things they can improve upon. And so it makes feedback more objective. And objective feedback is often much easier to hear and to provide. And so again, that relational piece, that understanding where someone's coming from, really hearing, that's the heart of our approach, is that hearing other people's perspectives. And this provides a really nice way to understand where people are coming from. It decreases those assumptions about why they approach things in specific ways. One example of that is in this past certification group that I did over the summer. One of the people in the certified community was doing work with a family from Middle Eastern descent. And there was a lot of plan A's on the APT. And in that self-reflection piece, he was able to talk through like, yes, there are a lot of plan A's. I'm working with this family. We're working on shifting some of their understanding of why behaviors are happening, and I'm honoring where that family is coming from right now. So we're planning all of these things, and we're starting with a smaller plan B. And so that really, like on the rubric, we have a category that says, decrease or increase the number of plan C's and why we're plan Cing and that sort of thing. But that understanding of where that family work was happening is just so helpful and reduces those assumptions and things like that as you're working with people. And going through the rubric really does make it quick and easy to kind of see, here's the skill, here's how it was demonstrated, here's how the person reflected. So it makes it quicker, easier to provide that feedback. And we've seen people are improving their skills in certification at a much faster rate. And so again, it gives people a really clear picture of exactly what we're working to self-reflect. It increases understanding of CPS. So we've seen some really incredible outcomes using this in certification and in coaching. And we feel like people are ready for certification at a faster rate when we're using it in level 2 coaching as well. Okay, so we want to give you an opportunity to kind of dive into the rubric and discuss it in small groups. So we're going to put you into small breakout groups. We're going to drop the rubric in the chat. I think the short form is already in there, but we'll drop both of them in again so that you can kind of look at the longer form, full form rubric. And we want you to pick one section to review as a group. So read through the categories, read through the, kind of progression of skills, and think about like, what do you really like about the section of the rubric that you're reviewing? How might you see yourself using the rubric in the work that you're doing? And what questions do you have about the rubric? So we're going to give you about 20 minutes or so to really dive in, think through this, you could use a case example if you wanted to, like however you want to work through it as a group, and then we'll come back and debrief as a large group after.
All right, and I have the breakouts. I'm going to open them up right now. Okay, discussion time. Would love to hear share outs from groups about some of those questions that we put into the shared on the screen and then also put into the broadcast. So just getting some feedback from all of you about, you know, what are some of the things that you liked about it? How do you see yourself being able to use this? Yeah, Karen, I see your hand raised.
Well, we tackled the drilling rubric, which is on page 3 of the short form, and it is the second column, balanced drilling, it's called. And we really appreciated the thought that went into it, and felt that there were some good elements like the idea of how, you know, making sure to empathize and not doing so very much if you're a beginner, and doing a lot more empathy as you get better. And similarly, we also like the focus on trying to understand the child's perspective, because that's really the ultimate goal, is really trying to understand where are they coming from. The one aspect we critiqued a bit was the idea that the more questions you ask, the more proficient you are. And we felt that there's a lot of nuance in terms of what kind of questions need to be asked. And sometimes more questions is not what you need to be doing. And we were worried that a parent or a person would come back and, well, I asked 10 questions. And really, I think that maybe is an area that might need a little rethinking. So we're not judging proficiency based on how frequently you ask questions, because that there's a lot more nuance and intuition that goes into how do you probe this person successfully, and questions may not be the best way to do it. So that was our primary feedback. And our group, if there's anyone else that wants to share something, please do. I hope I covered a good amount of what we talked about.
Yeah, and I think, Karen, that's a really good point that you bring up, is like there's nuances to these things. And so I think that's where the self-reflection part comes into play, for that individual to share, kind of reflect on like why maybe with this particular person, I used fewer questions because I was really concerned about their stress response, and that asking too many questions might activate their stress response. But we'll take every one of these and use them to consider it. But I think using the components in conjunction with the self-reflection and making sure we're kind of combining those two components to say, okay, so their self-reflection is indicating that they have a deep understanding of this, even though it's like looking like a 3 on this standard. So love it.
Allie and Elizabeth, you might want to pull up the Q&A as well. There's some in there. We might be able to
So one of the questions was, are all the sections on the short form the starred or the weighted sections from the longer form? Yes, all of them are there, and we added some additional ones too, in terms of, you know, there's some other things for philosophy and things like that we added in. So it is yes and. We have not thought all the way through about how to use this in parent group yet. So that is part of what we would love to get feedback on, is how you could see this being used with parent groups, like what types of things would be supportive for those of you that are teaching parent groups. So that is really helpful feedback for us. Also, converting to different technology platforms, a good thing for us to think about. We're looking at that in all sorts of different ways in all of our forms, so helpful to have that feedback as well. What else did people talk about in their groups?
I don't know how to raise my hand, but I can talk about my group.
Okay,
We focus mostly on the question of how would we use it. So in some ways, it gives you nice, clear, objective language to give feedback when sometimes I know I'm like not always exactly sure what's missing, but something's not quite right. So the rubric can help. It's someone also talked about they would use it in advance on themselves. So as a way to like check your work before you do the plan B or whatever part of CPS you're doing. And that it's good that it's like a yet another dose of practicing the model and breaking it into small pieces. We talked specifically about the section on, assessment, writing your lists and finding clear and specific problems to be solved. We talked about like that concept is sometimes so hard for people. It's the biggest jump. And so having all of the pieces of a good problem to be solved on that paper could be helpful for both the assessor and for the person doing the work. And we wondered if there was a place for a separate line item on just expectation setting itself, like separate from, we talk a lot about like if you've done the work of making sure your expectations are really clear and taught and appropriate, then you might need less plans altogether. So wondered if that could be its own kind of piece of this.
Yeah, good ideas. Jessica?
Hi. So my group talked about, we talked about assessment and a little bit about the planning. And we thought this was Chris's suggestion. We thought that the rubric was really clear. It was nuanced. We thought it would be really great to use in like supervision or coaching. One thing we were wondering is when it talks about, it says like most of the examples are like this. Several of the examples are like this, that we were wondering, would it be helpful? I realize that you can't exactly quantify it, but it might be helpful to some people to kind of quantify it a little bit more, like, but 3 out of 5 are this way, or 50% or something like that might be, it's just make it even more concrete, might be helpful when you're looking at, especially like the assessment questions.
Thank you. Michelle, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so we were, I'm sharing, sorry. Sorry, we're in a group of people.
It's okay.
But we were talking about how it would be nice to like break down each section by section. So like if we were doing a one-on-one coaching, or if you're meeting with just one person, instead of looking at the entire form, look at just a section of the sheet and kind of take them through that and move them along that way. And I also kind of brought it up in terms of leaders. So I work with youth villages at the residential treatment facility. And so even with like going through coaching with leaders, right, in order to get them to be able to see and understand and know what they're talking about for themselves, but also with their staff, just in terms of that development piece, being able to take them through each section by section. So that was something that we spoke about. And then also too, we did notice that there were asterisks on both forms for each section. Sean, who is in the room here with me, was saying that maybe that's the portions that are weighted more. Is that correct? That is correct? Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. I think I like what you said about like breaking it down, right? So I see a comment in the chat window about like it might be overwhelming for people to have this whole big thing. And we don't want it to be overwhelming for people. So remember, like what Bruce Perry talks about small relational doses of things to change the brain. We can think about applying that when we work on like coaching and supervising and supporting others to grow in their skills, that we don't have to set this full rubric out in front of people and say, now we're going to evaluate all the work that you're doing with CPS. That could increase a stress response. So Michelle, I really liked how you were talking about like breaking the components down and maybe just talking about, okay, like, hey, Tyrene, I think this relates to your kind of comment in the chat or in the Q&A, this question about like, okay, like, hey, let's review a situation that came up. We had a spontaneous plan B. let's reflect. Tell me a little bit more about what that was like. And then you think about like using the component of the rubric to reflect on that with them and provide some feedback around it. So it can be used as a large tool, or it can be broken down and really flexible. And I think what Elizabeth and I've talked about utilizing it is that it's really helpful to remember that relational learning is the best learning that happens. And so just handing it to someone and say, fill this out, you know, we have to really think carefully about, is that going to work for someone, or does someone need like this supportive context to be able to kind of reflect and do this work? Because it's very vulnerable when we're learning something new and we're trying something and we're stepping out of our comfort zone and we feel like someone is there, like who is an expert and has like maybe a power differential because they're in this expert place. So I think adapting it and using it in those settings, and we're going to love to hear how you're trying these things out in those creative ways, to give us some feedback about, you know, what your experience has been using it, and then beginning to do it, make adjustments to how we think about this tool being, you know, better for people. So I hope, Tyrena, that answered your question. Okay, good. Paul, I see your hand raised.
We focused on the Plan B intervention section of that, and we got to the end and talking about looking at the overall regulation. And I was wondering how the rubric might reflect occasionally the need to break off a Plan B and continue at another time, because sometimes, again, we can be doing the regulation and the drilling and all that skillfully, and still it's too much for the kid, and especially for the kids that can only take so much talk at one time.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things that we teach, right? We teach in trainings like Plan C, the Plan B, put a pin in it, pause it. And I'm realizing that that's actually, we have like regulation strategies, I think. I'm trying to like picture in my head what that section looks like, but we don't specifically name that. And so, Paul, are you thinking that it might be helpful to kind of just name that explicitly so it's there, so people can recognize that that is a regulation strategy, to pause it and go back to it at another time?
Possibly. Yeah.
Or it could be a self-reflection and a, you know, feedback piece too that could be included in there.
We also talked about like using the rubric like partially and not feeling overwhelmed. I mean, even we didn't even really get to the longer one, but even the short form of thinking about, especially if you're working in a place where you're really trying to help people to accept some of like the principles of CPS, that you don't want to necessarily discourage anybody, and that you could just rate on the information that you have. And then like say, like, we're not worrying about the rest of this. This is really what we're focusing on right now. So I'm really just taking a look at your APT and getting information here. Or like, I just saw you really doing brainstorming today in this session, and I just like used this piece of this rubric here to rate. And while like the document exists as a whole, we don't have to like feel like it's an all or nothing document.
Yes, absolutely. It's a tool, right? It's a tool to use in conjunction with our professional, you know, our professional judgment, our skills, our expertise. So all of those components are going into this work because, you know, we tried to make something that was comprehensive enough, but also not 60 pages of all the possible things that you can do in collaborative problem solving. So combining this as a tool with your expertise is how we think about, you know, utilizing this and adapting it to the needs of your organization. And Rusty, I haven't heard of innovation configuration maps. So that's something I'm going to have to look up and then compare it with rubrics, because that's something for me to expand my awareness in. So thank you for sharing that. I think we're coming up close to time, right? Jen, Elizabeth, do you want to just share that last? I think we covered most of those points for how you can use the rubric. And next steps. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so we just want you to practice using it. Give us feedback. Please stay in touch about how it's working, what you've noticed, those sorts of things. And then in January, we'll have a webinar topic specifically devoted to supporting others in their skill development. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, we're gonna head out for a 30-minute break.
Folks, a moment. Give folks a moment here just to reappear and get settled here. Encourage you, if you are able and feel comfortable, to flip your cameras on. I know for me, when I'm presenting, the more faces I can see, the more responsiveness from humans when you're presenting, the better. So I know that our guest speaker would likely enjoy that as well. And Dr. Stephen Porges is here and has joined us. I'm going to do a brief introduction here, and we have a quick poll that hopefully will provide Dr. Porges a little background on the community before we get going here. So it's a great pleasure to host Dr. Porges here. I actually know that many folks in the community have invoked his work frequently and seen commonalities and points of integration between our work and the work that he leads. And there's been sort of a slow, steady drumbeat of interest in polyvagal theory alongside collaborative problem solving. And whenever a drumbeat like that gets strong enough, we say to ourselves, you know what, we should see if we can facilitate some direct connection here. I've had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Porges speak at other conferences where we've spoken together, and I know that you all are in for a treat here. We're asking you to fill out a quick poll. It's just going to let us know how many of you are familiar with polyvagal theory, and if so, have you had formal training in polyvagal theory? I think that'll be helpful for everybody to see, and hopefully also for Dr. Porges as well. And the results are still filtering in here. But it looks like, let's say the majority of people are familiar, most somewhat, but some more. But there's a sizable contingent that is not familiar. And the bulk of people who have not had formal training in polyvagal theory. So without further ado here, you can read his illustrious bio there, but if you don't know about polyvagal theory, well, Dr. Porges is the originator of polyvagal theory, and he's the founder of the Polyvagal Institute. If you do know about it, you're thrilled to have this opportunity here to be able to and to have some time directly with him here. He's going to present with some slides for about a half an hour, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A that I will facilitate. And when we come back from a little break, we'll have some opportunity to debrief from the presentation and the discussion as well. But I don't want to waste any more time here. I want to get right to Dr. Porges. Thanks so much for joining us. And you can take it away from here, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I went onto your website and immediately found some common themes, but I also thought it would be nice, as you requested, to kind of give an overview of the theory. In general, I find giving overviews of the theory too time-consuming and much rather have an interactive dialogue, but given the fact that there's actually a noticeable number that are totally unfamiliar with the theory. So it's going to be useful to kind of describe it. So I'm going to do the first test is whether or not I can do a screen share. Okay, let's see if that works. Let's see. Is it up there? Do you see my screen?
Yes, we see the slides in sort of slide sorter view right now.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we'll just go to a presentation mode and let it go. Let's great. Let me start. Okay. I'll see if I can get some faces up. Just, I have too much of the screen. Well, we'll just go the way it is. Um, Basically, the theory kind of explains that there are physiological states that represent our body being in a state of safety. And when we're in that state of safety, then everything else seems to fall into place. We're social, we're good learners, we engage. And I think this is the part that overlaps with your community, that we're talking about kids whose ability to access really their true talents seems to be disrupted by being locked into biobehavioral states that are more defensive or more reactive. Polyvagal theory literally gives it a name and explains what's going on physiologically. And the job now is, how do you send signals of safety that are really asking the nervous system of the child or the other individual to being in a state of safety, so that there's accessibility and there's the ability to learn, the ability to socialize, and to be aware of oneself and others. So let's kind of put this together in a sense. This is in a sense a motivational slide. What is polyvagal theory? It's a new paradigm with an optimistic perspective. And in a way, this is actually some of the same types of languaging that you use on your website. We're not talking about pathology. We're talking about children being locked into physiological states. And when they're in states of defense, the accessibility is being challenged. And if we view it as a state that we can optimistically change and manipulate, then we don't, in a sense, start blaming the child for not attending, for not learning, and not doing things. So the real, I guess, total overlap is that behavior from a polyvagal perspective is not always intentional. Behavior can often be literally more reflexive and based upon the physiological state that you're in. And if you're in a calmer physiological state, then behaviors can be much more intentional. So let me kind of go through what I think the theory provides. It provides a model in which we assume that the autonomic state, the physiology, the neuroregulation of our visceral organs, and you will know this by sweating, by gut problems, or by palpitations of your heart, that this autonomic state influences our behavior and our reactions to the environment, and our ability to self-regulate and our ability to co-regulate, meaning sociality. So the ability to co-regulate, calm down through utilizing signals of others, requires that you are in a state that you're aware of others and that you're looking for those signals of reassurance. And so therapists and teachers who are dealing with children who are locked into states of defense understand that when your child is in certain physiological states, it's very difficult for them to calm down, feel safe enough in your presence. The model does not assume that atypical reactivity, asociality, or hypersensitivities are permanent or the product of a rewiring of the nervous system. It's not neuroplasticity from the polyvagal perspective. The parsimonious explanation is that these features are naturally occurring adaptive reactions that are primarily determined by the biobehavioral state you're in. And if you're locked into a biobehavioral state that is reactive and defensive, well, then social interactions, learning, and behavioral regulation are also greatly compromised. So it provides this optimistic strategy to increase flexibility, resilience, and sociality. But it gives you a hint of how to enter that world by retuning the autonomic nervous system. And what we'll start learning is that as you become more polyvagal informed, you have clues, you have hints about how you can engage the nervous system of the other to send signals of safety so that the autonomic nervous system can move out of a state of defense. So the first principle of the theory is that autonomic state is that intervening variable influencing and biasing behavioral, cognitive, and physiological reactivity. Two contexts. Now, this will overlap with your conceptual viewpoint, which really says it's not merely a stimulus response world. You can't totally control behavior by manipulation of stimuli and expect reliable responses. There's something in the middle. Polyvagal theory says in the middle is the organism, and that organism has measurable attributes, and it can be measured. And in my perspective that focuses on the state of the autonomic nervous system, because that has to deal with foundational, fundamental survival mechanisms. So the idea is that you can be in different physiological states. The green state is like all's go, so I'm accessible and can engage you. The yellow is I'm very concerned, I'm very worried, I'm hypervigilant. And the red really is I have totally frozen in space, I want to disappear. So there are different global biobehavioral states, and they have different basically topographies of autonomic features that are measurable. So it takes it out of the intentional aspect that the behavior is only driven by intention, but now gives an understanding that the physiological state that we're in affects not only our behavior, but how we detect and process stimulation in our environment. So the theory focuses on measuring the chronic state of the organism as the individual's vulnerability and accessibility at the time of the challenge. So a challenge could be the task, could be the context. So my physiological state, while giving a presentation, affects how I process questions and how I engage the audience. Predictions of biobehavioral reactivity from chronic states becomes a way of assessing and evaluating. So we could look at the physiology and we can make reasonably well-informed hypotheses about flexibility and resilience and biobehavioral reactivity of the individual. And this now leads us to plausible strategies of intervention to retune the autonomic nervous system, to calm it, and to make the individual more accessible to sociality, to learning, and just to literally comfort, giving up that hypersensitivity of defensiveness. The second principle, and I'm going to go through 5 principles, and then we'll get into a discussion. The second principle is that we really have rules about that organismic state, that space, that physiology that lives between the stimulus and response, because it's really based upon 3 neural circuits that are actually phylogenetically ordered in a hierarchy. And what that means is that newer circuits are actually inhibitory over older circuits. And those circuits promote when the newest one is on, we're safe, we're engaging, we're well regulated. Remove that newer circuit and we become defenses, because this is like I sense danger and now fight flight. My autonomic nervous system efficiently recruits resources, metabolic resources, to defend. And when I'm totally overwhelmed and have absolutely no neurobiological insight of how to survive, my body may just shut down. And so in terms of life-threatening environments, especially trauma and complex trauma for childhood adversity, what you see is that children may go into immobilization and dissociative states. And this is really, it's adaptive life supporting, but not supporting co-regulation, learning, and sociality. And this is all based upon the notion of what the autonomic nervous system is. And the autonomic nervous system is the nervous system that regulates your internal organs. You know about it from like the sympathetic nervous system, which you think of as fight flight, but it's also related to exuberance and literally having a good time. But in independence on its own, when it gets triggered without its partner, the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the nervous system down, then you are in a state of defense. But the parasympathetic nervous system had been portrayed as an antagonistic system to the sympathetics. This is the traditional way of looking at the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetics as an accelerator and the parasympathetic as a brake. And the major neural component of the parasympathetic is the vagus. But polyvagal theory says you have 2 different vagal pathways. You have one that regulates the organs above the diaphragm, and another one that regulates organs below the diaphragm. And they have a different evolutionary history, and they have a different neuroanatomy. And what happens is that when vertebrates start to evolve, the cardioinhibitory, the brainstem ability to slow our heart rate, those neurons, many of them move ventrally, where they got linked to the nerves that control the face. So what happened with social mammals is that we literally broadcast our visceral organ state in our voice and our face. And of course, intuitively, as a human, you detect this. But also, if you have puppies or horses or cats, they detect that in you as well, from your voice, from your gestures. So if we look carefully at this, we see there are two pathways, one going to organs above the diaphragm and one going to organs of the gut. This helps you, in a sense, from the symptoms or problems that people have, you start to understand where they are locked into what defensive system they're using. So if they have high heart rate and they're constipated, they're basically locked into a sympathetic and this ventral vagus is off. But if they start shutting down and having diarrhea and fainting episodes, they're now using a more, I would say, dissociative immobilization dorsal vagal component. And the nerves that go to above the diaphragm and below, the two different pathways of the vagus, one is myelinated, one's not myelinated. And all that tells you is that one has a faster, more refined system of regulation. And the myelinated one is not only faster and more specific, it's also newer. And when that system is functioning, it contains the sympathetics and dorsal, or in a sense, it recruits them. So now you can immobilize without being in a state of shock or fear. And we call that intimacy. Or we can play, be mobilized with a smile on her face. And that's where these systems start working together. And a little bit later, you'll see examples of that. But the interesting part is through evolution, the two different vagal components come in different times. The dorsal one is very, very ancient, and the ventral one is uniquely mammalian. We can see this in terms of embryology in the human as well. What is most interesting is when the ventral vagus starts to develop, it's not merely a cardioinhibitory control of the heart. It's linked to the cranial nerves that regulate facial muscles, including our intonation of voice and our facial expression. So now we as a species can signal to another, are we accessible or not? And this model is hierarchical, and this is really where the clues of the theory, how they get useful in application, is that if it's a hierarchical model and you know that the newer circuits inhibit the older ones, then interventions can be tailored to trigger the newer circuit, the myelinated ventral vagus. And of course, people talk about ingestion or sucking or humming or breathing as calming mechanisms because they recruit the ventral vagus, and that kind of downregulates sympathetic. But individuals who have had severe adversity history, their bodies are really prone to shut down. Then mobilization keeps them out of shutting down. And you see that adaptive feature in many people who have had adversity histories are locked into states of high anxiety. And that is, if they keep moving, they can't shut down. Now, once we see this hierarchy, we now have another type of model to contrast that with. And this is a model of literally evolution in reverse. And this is called dissolution. And this was introduced decades, actually 150 years ago by John Hewlings Jackson, who was a very renowned neurologist. And he was literally noticing that when you have damage to higher brain structures, the lower ones literally rise in activity, meaning the lower ones, which are also evolutionarily older. So what I realized is that the autonomic nervous system followed the same rules that Jackson described for the brain. So if you had cortical damage, you have subcortical expressions. So in a way, people, when they have cortical damage, become more primitive. And they're using older circuits that evolved earlier. The same thing occurs in the autonomic nervous system. And so now can summarize what principle 3 is. Principle 3 is that when I'm challenged, I now move down to more and more primitive, older states. And this has been a guiding principle in neurology. But this principle of dissolution forms really the basis of how you test hypotheses regarding polyvagal theory and how you literally test interventions. Because what it says is that if I take away the control of this ventral vagus, I am more likely to be reactive and literally go into tantrum. But if I now no longer have that mobilization circuit, I'm exhausted, my body shifts into a different type of calmness. It's a calmness of shutting down because there are no resources. The body is trying to stay alive. And we can see that you can have social engagement as calming, and you can see the facial muscles of the adult and the child as they're interacting. They're not immobilized, they're mobilized, but their faces are conveying feelings of safety and the ventral vagal circuit, especially orbital muscle around the eye. And that's called the orbicularis oculi. And if we pull that system off, we basically optimize our ability to mobilize with fear, but it's very metabolically costly, and we can't do that for very long. And again, this is where my work started when I was studying high-risk babies, and I was seeing these preterm high-risk babies as having apnea. They stopped breathing, and bradycardia, clinical bradycardia, where their heart rates dropped too low to support basically oxygenation of the blood. And I was basically confused because the literature was saying that those bradycardias, which were life-threatening, were vagal. And I was really, at that point in time, a proponent that the vagus could do no wrong. It was really your protector. And I was studying components of heart rate variability. The one that I focused on was respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and was showing that in preterm babies, if they had more of that vagal component, they were doing fine. If they didn't, then they were really potentially going to have a very difficult developmental trajectory. And that resulted in the polyvagal theory, because the bradycardia, the vagal-mediated bradycardia and the vagal-mediated heart rate variability were being driven through two different neural pathways coming from two different areas of the brain. And when the neural one, that ventral one that gave you heart rate variability, was depressed, then the vulnerability for bradycarditis came through. And this really was the root of polyvagal theory. And here you can see immobilization with fear, and you can see that the mouse in the jaws of the cat is now, in a sense, functionally fainted. So we use the term death feigning, but it's not a voluntary reaction. It's very similar to the initial reactions that many individuals under severe threat and adversity, where their bodies will shut down. But over time, their bodies develop a different strategy. They freeze. They literally don't move, but they don't go into this fainting or vasovagal shutdown. And then if it persists, many individuals have a different, I would say, nuanced adaptive strategy, and that is they dissociate. And this gives you the model that when everything is good, we use our head to communicate. We use that ventral vagal circuit. And when that doesn't work to keep us in a safe place, we use our limbs, we move, and that requires the sympathetic nervous system. And when that doesn't work, we go into a immobilization strategy through that dorsal vagal complex. So we see that there is this developmental aspect, but I think the most important part to anyone involved in either the education or clinical world is this understanding of this emergent social engagement system, which was the product of those cardioinhibitory vagal neurons moving from the dorsal, the back of the brain stem, to the front, where they became integrated with the nerves that regulated the face and head. And this is this principle for that these neurons lead to an integrated brainstem, a circuit that enable the coordination of suck, swallow, breathe, and vocalize. And this circuit forms the neurophysiological substrate of an integrated social engagement system. And we understand, if we're developmentalists, we see that suck, swallow is a way of calming for the baby. But what we forget is we still do that as adults. We go out for drinks. We consider ingestion as a social behavior. we do not consider the subdiaphragmatic part of digestion as social, and that's the dorsal vagus. So this ventral vagus is part of our social circuit because it broadcasts our physiological state, because it's connected to the nerves that regulate our heart. So we are literally broadcasting in our voice through the intonation, what's called prosody, the visceral state of our body. And if you think about how you engage a baby or a pet, you'll use a very melodic voice. We call it, infant-directed speech or petese. We know intuitively how to calm another mammal. The problem is that as we become adults and we interact with other adults, we tend to think their behaviors are intentional. Therefore, we focus on language and not on the intonation of our voice, which is conveying our physiological state to the other. And this, again, tells us that that evolutionary journey resulted in this social engagement system. And this face-heart connection, which is there at birth, becomes this whole core of really how we live our lives. And if we have metabolic demands, perceived danger, life threat, or illness, that system gets depressed, and this results in a face that's not social and a physiological state in which that ventral vagus is no longer breaking or calming the heart down. And this enables or literally gives permission to the body to express defensive behaviors. So one important take home is look at people's faces because it reflects their state. Listen to their voices because it reflects their state. So cues of safety work through the face-heart connection. And so we can start thinking of that if I use a melodic voice, if I smile, I'm really functioning as a neuromodulator of the other person's nervous system. And the other part we want to really understand that mammals, even the earliest mammals, use nursing. So this system was there for over 200 million years ago, the notion of using ingestion to regulate physiological state. And we can see it in a mother and an infant. On the top left, two peers interacting. We see from the facial expressivity, the comfort in each other's proximity. We can see it in the lower one with the two primates, again, a mother and the child. And what I often like to say is you can see it in other cross-species relationships. And again, look at the upper part of the face, and you see that they're sharing that moment of basically immobilization without fear. But in the world that most people are in, if you're interested in dealing with, let's say, in the population to whom I'm speaking, many of the children that you're working with have problems with their social engagement system. So let's talk about what those core deficits would appear to be from a polyvagal perspective. One, their voices would lack prosody, intonation. So it may be, in a sense, very monotonic, could be high pitch, or it could be booming and with a low pitch, but not melodic. Eye contact and difficulties in what you would perceive as social communication, not making eye contact, and even in informing or trying to demand eye contact is often results in a reaction of discomfort on the other individual's level. And that is because when we are in states of threat, eye contact is even more threatening. And this is deep within our physiology. And the other one we'd see is blunted facial expressivity, especially to the upper part of the face. And difficulties in regulation, you might see individuals as being hypervigilant, anxious, distractible, impulsive, have tantrums, or be hypoaroused. Compromised vagal regulation about digestion, and what you'd probably find is with a lot of them, there's this kind of cycle of constipation, which is when you're locked into a sympathetic mobilized state, and then diarrhea when the body goes into this immobilized state. So you see this cyclic regulation as opposed to a normal digestive patterns. Difficulty in listening, and this is also interesting of you. We think that if we say things, they're heard, but what we don't realize is that when the individual's physiological state shifts into a more mobilized defensive state, the middle ear structures change their muscle tone, and the individuals start picking up low frequency background danger signals and not what's in speech. So you may find children who are locked in these states having language delays, or in a sense, even difficulty developing or understanding or basically auditory processing. But since they can't hear speech well, they're actually become hyposensitive to human voice, while at the same time they become hypersensitive to sounds. And I became very interested in sound sensitivities and was building intervention models to literally recruit the neuroregulation of the middle ear muscles to dampen this hypersensitivities, and had more, the effect of the intervention had much more global or more profound effects because it affected regulation in general, increased vagal activity, and enhanced more spontaneous engagement. The other part you might see, part of this depressed social engagement system, is oromotor defensiveness, meaning that they might be selective eaters and not be, in a sense, food curious. The last point that I will emphasize is this construct of neuroception. And this is our nervous system's ability to detect safety or threat cues without awareness. So it's a reflexive detection of risk that triggers adaptive autonomic state to optimize survival. It's a word I made up because I couldn't use the word perception, because perception implied an awareness, but neuroception is reflexive. So we react to something, our body goes into a state. We then have interoception, where we feel that bodily change. That becomes in our awareness. And now we have to understand what that awareness tells us. Often when we get triggered into these defense, autonomic defense ones, our body will feel it in our gut, or our heart will go. And we will use that physiological feeling as a motivator for specific aggressive, or I would say survival type behaviors. And good therapists who work on individuals slow that time up between the stimulus and the response, so the person really starts to understand that their body has reacted, and that's part of being a human, but they don't have to have an intentional behavior following that. They can control that once they become aware of it. So neuroception triggers dissolution, or fosters homeostatic process of health, growth, and restoration. The dissolution will be fight, flight, and shutting down. It's a portal to reverse threat-induced dissolution. That's where it's important. So we now know that intonation and vocalization, and I developed certain types of acoustic stimulation, which basically amplify the features that a mother's voice would have, that have an intuitive calming effect. Those frequencies are identifiable, and we could create an intervention that was quite effective. Neuroception of threat is shared with virtually all living organisms. It's part of being a human system. However, neuroception of safety seems to be limited to mammalian modifications of the autonomic nervous system. There may be a homologue of that with birds, but it's not. I'm basically very focused on what we can learn to enhance human experience. So this notion of safety, or turning off threat reactions, is something that our nervous system evolved to have. It's like an extra toolkit that going into defense is natural, but how do we get out of defense? And historically or evolutionarily, mammals have used other basically trusting relationships to mitigate threat reactions. And so neuroception, we can conceptualize it as our onboard TSA agent, and we can say that sometimes the threshold is too high and sometimes it's too low, and that is really, that threshold modulation is going to be a function of the physiological state we're in. And so in general, if the environment is safe, we go into an autonomic state that enables social engagement. When we get triggered of danger, we fight and flee. And we get triggered with life threat, we just try to implode and disappear. But that's not the life we want to live. We want to live a life in which the environment is safe. And now we have resource. So we have that green, that social engagement system, and that can become a hybrid state with our sympathetics, and we call that play. And likewise, when our social engagement system is still on board and we immobilize, we can have moments of intimacy where our bodies are so calm they can give up their skeletal motor defenses and literally the bodies can conform to each other. And of course, we see this in individuals who can give good hugs and where their bodies conform versus people who want to give a hug, but once someone else's arms goes around them, their body gets rigid. And we see the social engagement and calming, and we can see that you can be mobilized without fear. And these are kittens playing. What's interesting about this kittens playing is they will maintain face-to-face interaction. Their claws are retracted. They don't break skin with bites, but they're always looking at each other's face and voice. So they're using the other to, in a sense, distinguish between aggression and play. And we can do that also with children. We see they're mobilized. They're not afraid. They're not running. How do we know? We see their faces. Their social engagement is on board. And we can see that individual bodies can immobilize and become comforting. And you can see that's where health, growth, and restoration really occurs when we give up the metabolic demands of our skeletal motor system. And so to summarize, we had these 5 principles. I'll share these slides so I don't have to read through them again, but I went through each one of them. And basically, it's an evolutionary journey of sociality through co-regulation. And sociality triggers a neural mechanism to turn off threat reactions and simultaneously optimize homeostatic functions. And those functions are not just oxygenation, digestion. One homeostatic function is sociality. We are a connected species. Linking sociality and homeostatic functions elevates the role of sociality as both a homeostatic process and a neuromodulator supporting homeostatic processes. It reframes psychological experiential constructs like threat, stress, and anxiety as simply disrupting homeostasis. So we can move it to a more objective, we don't need the psychological constructs. We say that if we disrupt our homeostasis, we're going to have emergent properties that we may experience as threat, stress, and anxiety. And this places feeling safe enough at the foundation of human experience, relationship, society, self-actualization, and even spirituality. In essence, our society is based on trust. Human civilization is based on trust. And so adaptive consequences of defense, it disrupts that ventral vagus, it depresses social engagement, but it permits efficient increases in sympathetic excitation. And we'll see other things that you may see within the profiles of the children you work with: inflammation, sensory hypersensitivities, and asocial behavior. One important take-home from the theory in terms of the clinical impact is to emphasize the response and not the event. So in the world of trauma, everyone wanted to identify traumatic events and create a diagnosis based on traumatic events. So ACEs is one of those. But the theory says ACEs are important. There's nothing wrong with getting that information. But the critical point is what happens to that individual. What was the individual's response? And what we start to find out is some people are very buffered from the same stimuli or trauma experiences that others. So the event is important, but some people have nervous systems that are very resilient. And so what we start to understand is the feelings that people have really is a projection, a reasonably good projection of their autonomic state. So feeling safe is really dependent upon the autonomic state supporting homeostatic function. And if you want more, if you're interested in joining our Traumatic Stress Research Consortium, just send an email. We are If you study trauma, we're trying to get information from therapists and their clients. We do survey work. And if you have interest in polyvagal theory, contact the Polyvagal Institute. Thank you. Okay, we're
All right.
back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Porges. What a tour de force of your work there in a half an hour. And I'm
Well,
imagining that our community is going to have a lot of questions and
yeah, let me start off. It's certainly not my presence to do a lecture. I really enjoy the interaction, the questions, but you have to have some basic material so it doesn't appear to be out there, unrelated to what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, and as you saw, we have maybe a third of the community who, for whom your work is new to them. And, you know, our community does work in everything from homes to schools, to hospitals, to treatment facilities, to foster care agencies, to all kinds of places. So, you know, their vast experience of applying these kinds of principles. I want to make sure, I want to prioritize the back and forth between you and the community. I just want to make a couple comments to set the stage. And while I'm doing that, I am going to encourage folks, please use the Q&A, because I'm going to go right there to draw from the comments and questions there. But, you know, I love what you said, Dr. Porges, at the end about feeling safe being at the foundation of human experience. Yeah. And when I think about our work, you know, kids who exhibit concerning, challenging behavior, they're often met with responses that try to leverage the power differential between adults and kids, that use power and control to try to change behavior. And that is at its core fundamentally opposed to creating a trusting sense of safety. You know, I think we talk a lot in this community about helping to regulate kids, and we talk a lot about the importance of empathy to be able to do that. But one of the questions we get asked the most is, you know, people are aware that dysregulated adults are not very good at, as you pointed out at the beginning of your presentation, are not very good at regulating dysregulated kids. So a lot of this comes back to how do we adults regulate ourselves, and how do we, I guess even before that, notice signs of dysregulation? And I'd love to just hear any thoughts you have about that before.
Well, you know, you're asking, these are the big questions, because you're embedded in your question is how people have been trained. They've been trained that interventions are manualized interventions, that it's not really the interaction. And we've been taught literally that it's the words and not the intonation of our words that are the critical aspect of who we are. So we really have not been schooled to understand the true attributes and the power of human interaction. It's almost as if we're this wonderful species with all these onboard toolkits, and we've been taught not to use them. Literally, it's been filtered out. So we even when we get into what's intelligent, we think that it's memorizing still, as opposed to problem solving. We just kind of forget what it is. And of course, our nervous system loves problem solving. So we're a curious species. You know, we have to understand what is our biology. Our biology is to interact, to be connected, to literally feel safe enough to be held in the arms of another. And what you're seeing, of course, is that people get triggered. Now let's roll this back a little, because you said some really critical things. And that is, number one, we are a human species. We are human. What does that mean? It means that we are vulnerable and can easily be triggered. So if someone across from us is broadcasting signals of threat to us, our natural behavior is to react and respond almost in kind. But now we have to go one step further. We have to go in and understand not just the neuroception and say threat gives us threat back, but we now have to interpret the interoception, the feelings. And that point, when we start to investigate our bodily feelings, that awareness of what's going on inside us, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to expand that time and literally to take our empathy, which is the reaction, and reframe it as compassion. And I don't know the background of many of the people there, but there was a psychoanalyst by the name of Viktor Frankl. Anyone? So Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, but embedded in his book, which I read as a grad student and then rediscovered it only a couple of years ago, was he said that there's the space between stimulus and response is where free will is. So we, in a sense, this is, I think, what you're trying to teach within your own group, that, yeah, there's stimuli out there, but if we expand that space, we can, in a sense, process it. We can move from, I would say, empathic reactivity, because we are human, to compassionate, I not even say acceptance, but compassionate strategies that enable us to calm the other without having to defend for ourselves.
Well said. Very well said. Well, Dr. Porges, we have all kinds of questions that are pouring in here, so I want to get right to them. I'll read them out to you. So the first one, which Lauren acknowledges, is a deep question. I think most of this work is pretty deep work. She says, with the advancement of technology and heavier dependency on text communication instead of face-to-face or speech communication, are we losing access to these social engagement and regulation skills? Love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. So before the pandemic, I used to say, when phones came in, we lost the face, but we still had the voice. And so people, still could understand. People would talk to someone and they say, is something the matter? Because they could hear it in their voice. But then when email and texting started coming in, they took the voice, the word from the voice. And then there was a lot of misunderstanding. People would say, why are you angry at me? If someone just, didn't, use capitals or whatever it was, had to develop a convention of how to communicate. And then finally, everyone's threshold of reactivity got dampened. This way people interacted. But we lost that. Now, Zoom, I mean, this is not perfect, but it's not bad. And so during the pandemic, I did a lot of Zooming, and we all did a lot of Zooming during the pandemic. And I will give you my own personal one. And it's really very polyvagal. I hurt my back and was in excruciating pain and couldn't get into a bed for 6 weeks. But I still did podcasts and even full day webinars. Why? Once I was on this engagement with people, had no pain. And it was this hierarchy. It wasn't healing. It was just the hierarchy kept that sympathetic pain defense contained. And to me, it was really striking because it was, I mean, I was in excruciating pain, and yet, my responsibility as a professional, I was on there, but that was not what was dealing with the pain. It was the interaction. So we get something out of Zoom. It's better for me. So I always want a Zoom and not a phone call. I want the interaction. I want to see whom I'm talking to. I want to get an understanding of the person. It's not perfect, but it's not that bad. I will, let me make one other point, and that is in the therapeutic world, which is really where I slip into, because a lot of remote therapies, those individuals who have severe adversity histories, many of them actually like remote therapy better than face-to-face. They can turn the camera off and they're safe in their own home and chair. So what they're saying is, if my body feels safe, I can be more accessible to you as a therapist.
That's actually really reassuring. And you mentioned the optimism built into your work at the outset. That's reassuring and very optimistic for us to think about, because I think as a clinician, what's lost in the work that I do when I do it over Zoom, working with kids and families, but I have seen that there's a lot gained at the same time. And we as an organization provide a lot of training, support, remotely via Zoom. So, the reframing of this adding some things in as opposed to taking them away, where we've got voice and face, that's reassuring. Thank you. Next question. Can you expand on the importance of the environment and the activity when interacting with children? And I can maybe put a little meat on the bones of this too. We talk a lot about how to collaborate with kids, but one of the things we spend some time talking about is, if you're going to have a problem-solving discussion with a child, where should you have that? When should you have that? While doing what? And would love to hear your thoughts there.
Okay, so immediately I start seeing the world that many therapists are trained in, and that is that it's very busy, very noisy. And let's talk about how, like the therapies that are implemented for children. They keep them very active. And the answer, my feeling is we have to think about contexts that are quieter. That does not mean totally dead sound, but quieter, because bodies react to external stimuli. Especially many of the kids you're working with are going to have hypersensitivities. And what that is going to tell you is that their bodies are not safe in that space. So you reduce the sensory flow and you create a sensory flow that gives both agency to the kid and is literally, let's say, has a programmatic sense to it. So like listening to music, which may have a theme, certain types of play. I think dance movement therapies and play therapies are really neural exercises. And when they get constructed and the amount of sensory stimulation is literally created into almost like a formula that results in reciprocal relationship and movement, you are literally doing very powerful therapy.
And you know, we're often suggesting when people are doing problem solving with kids, they be active with them.
Well, let's say how active. Yeah, that is the
right. Yes. Yes. I've tried. It reminds me of trying to use our model while playing one-on-one on a basketball court with a kid at a charter school in New York City, in the middle of New York City, and that was a little challenging. There was a lot of noise and a lot of activity going on. But taking a walk in the woods, different story.
Yeah. So, and the walk in the woods, if the head starts looking, you look at each other, it's movement and engagement. It's like those kids, the slide I showed, kids smiling and running. Nothing wrong with running, but the smile is telling you everything there.
All right, great. Next question here. You mentioned kids, pets, etc., get cues from eye contact and sound and sounds from the other playmates. How does touch and physical contact play a role in polyvagal theory?
Well, polyvagal theory, okay, it's not directly in the theory, but the theory starts to understand about it. Any type of stimulus, we can, in a sense, understand how the body reacts. So if you're a somatic-oriented therapist, now, many of the somatic therapists are very, I would use the term polyvagal informed. They're very embedded. Our polyvagal theory becomes embedded in their languaging and what they're doing. And what they're really saying is touch is fine if the body is not defensively reacting. So in a sense, you become, quote, polyvagal informed, and then the sensory stimuli become part of the interaction and accessibility. But what happens in all forms of therapy, you get kind of schooled in what you're doing. And if you focus on touch without the feedback coming through the, I would say, polyvagal channels, you're not going to be detecting that the touch is now being interpreted by the body as aversive. Thank you.
All right. Sorry for the rapid fire here, but people have lots of questions for you. And it's great to hear the answers. So this is from Ted, who thanks you for the presentation. And I know he's a big fan of your work and asks, are there ways to help adults working with kids to help them better know their own, in other words, the adult's own nervous system and ventral vagus experience? And he gives examples of meditation, yoga, etc.
Yeah. So this is new now. So this is not even released yet. I developed, I'm very interested in signaling our nervous system. I say our, I mean mine as well, that it can be in a state of safety. And that's what this person's asking. Can I signal my nervous system to be accessible to another? And I've actually developed with a colleague, actually his name's Anthony Gorey. He's a basically a composer, acoustic engineer. I mean, he's quite a brilliant guy. We basically have created a new type of music that embeds in the music endogenous bodily rhythms, because when we hear rhythms associated with our body calms down. So it's like going on a swing or floating in the ocean, but what we have are these rhythms are embedded in the composition. And part of the secret of this is that the tempo is dynamically changing rhythmically. So in a sense, the body can't refuse it. So we think of tempo as being fixed, and we try to get the beat with things. This is now going slower or fast, it's having its own pattern. So it pulls the body in. And so the real issue is, can we as reactive humans in the world that we're in today, can we find a tool that will enable us to allow our body to literally, where the brainstem, not the cortex, the brainstem can regulate the organs and optimize the state of homeostasis. And the product of that is what happens to the cortex. The cortex is no longer trying to rule the brainstem, which is our life. Don't feel this way, don't do this, don't, just override all that. And instead, the cortex now is literally released from those burdens of being literally the prison guard to that of being creative. And we call it spirituality or meditation. So the bottom line is the cortex then becomes problem solving and creative. And so the first product on this technology is going to be released by Unite, and that's the company that is distributing the Safe and Sound protocol. But Safe and Sound protocol was to stimulate co-regulation, social engagement. And that's important. I'm not minimizing the importance of that, but I had overlooked what I consider the core problem was that our brains forgot to regulate the body. So there's another form of co-regulation. We basically instructed through our cortex, don't regulate the body. And of course, we talk about this as numbness in the clinical world. And so folding back on the question, the first step is awareness of one's own body. And the second step is toolkits that enable that internal feedback loops to work.
And Dr. Porges, we do a lot of work collaborating with Dr. Bruce Perry, whose work I'm sure you're familiar with, and folks in the community, you'll recognize overlap here with talking about patterns, repetitive, rhythmic activity that is regulating, music being a wonderful example of that.
So let me kind of jump in. So when I developed this technique with my colleague, he says, we have to give them 10 different themes. I said, no, you give them one theme at the theme, because it's the predictability of the theme, which is the guardrail of safety to the nervous system. And after he started to listen to what we were creating, he totally agreed. So that's, Bruce is right on board with these types of predictability. Our nervous system needs predictability. And even when you start watching like children on autistic spectrum, when they line things up and try to create order, that's been kind of viewed as a pathology. It's not. It's their quest to find some predictability in their world.
Yeah, and certainly, a lot of folks in this community work with kids with pretty significant trauma histories, and that activated stress response for kids with trauma history, in large part, comes from the unpredictability of stimuli, stressful stimuli coming their way, and so you have sort of hypersensitive stress response. Okay, keeping going here. I want to get as many of these as possible. Donna says, how can we best coach others to tap into these resources, their own physiology, to achieve the safety and calm instead of the fear response?
So I think it's not just the fear response, it's a shame response that goes as well. And so we start off by remember, I'm not the therapist in the room. I can have ideas, but I'm not the therapist. I sit back and say the therapists have a resource, meaning that they can deal with being triggered. I may not. So the issue is really our first step is to understand that being a human is to react to signals of threat. That's not wrong. So there's a fundamental foundational survival reaction that we start off by honoring. Now, it's not the reaction that creates the problem. It's what we do with that reaction. Do we use it as a motivator for aggressive behavior? Or do we use it as a signal that this is too much for my body and I need now to take my body into a safer place? And I think the first one is honor that we are human. Don't go into this mode of shame or try to deny that you did this. The issue is our bodies react. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes those reactions don't fit the need of our job or our relationships, and we have to be aware of that.
Yeah, we like to say our philosophy is kids, and in fact, people do well if they can, right? No, we're all trying to respond to them.
So the term I use is safe enough. Okay, it's the same.
Yes. All right, this is a concrete question here. What is the best way to explain to adults how to signal safety with their facial expressions? Is it a subtle smile?
Okay, this is a very interesting question because in part, our nervous systems are really pretty good in detecting whether it's a valid smile or not. The question comes from almost a view that this is a intentional instrumental behavior, and I'm trying to say it's a broadcasting of our physiological state, and this requires a different orientation to our act of being present with another human being. So I use a term like, why do I enjoy doing podcasts or webinars or giving talks? Yeah, I enjoy the moment of it because it's social nourishment to me. And when people talk about burnout, they're talking about no longer getting the nourishment of the interaction. And so what I'm really trying to say is there's a degree of, I would say, authenticity that's necessary, and we have to embrace that.
So forcing the smile is not going to signal safety, but rather focusing on your own regulation.
Okay.
To the point where that smile might emerge naturally.
Okay. So we can go again into how behavior mod has been used in the autistic spectrum community, like eye contact so the kids will make eye contact with great fear, or smile, or will go to the lower part of the face, which they have everyone has much more voluntary control than the more spontaneous, and I would say almost autonomic utility of the orbicularis oculi around the eye. And so they're smiling down there, and our nervous systems know the difference. And so we say, oh, don't trust that person.
Well, this is why I always describe we teach a problem-solving process. I've seen many scenarios where somebody would get an A+ on our rubric of exactly how to sort of follow the ingredients of this process we teach, but you can feel that they're really not in it. They don't really believe in what they're trying to do. And kids are so aware of that immediately. I think it's for all the reasons that you've described so eloquently today.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up, again, how are healthcare providers on all dimensions, how are they trained, or how are they allowed to relate to their clients? In many environments, they're not even allowed to relate. They are basically deliverers of a service that is then billed, and they burn out. They're not getting any joy from it, any feelings of gratitude of being helpful. We're approaching it. I would say we need to start from the foundational, fundamental issue that is all healthcare relationships need to be based on trust with the client has to trust the provider, and that literally changes autonomic state and allows both of them to be more authentic.
Well said. All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in. We've got 2 more questions. One's very specific, and then I'll go to the larger one to finish us off here. The specific one is Eric is wondering about olfactory reception or expression as a factor, and would love to hear your thoughts on that front.
Well, again, I would say that olfaction is another cranial nerve unrelated to the social engagement system polyvagal theory. However, olfaction conveys powerful cues, and many of those cues are, I would say, associatively learned. So they can, in a sense, if you have a visceral reaction, then it becomes polyvagal because that visceral reaction now gets associated with context and other things. So yes, indirectly, and it can be very powerful, but it's not really embedded in an attribute of the theory.
Makes sense. All right, and Garnett has our last question here, who says, she says, for an individual that's highly dissociative due to trauma, will the Safe and Sound protocol help them to regulate enough to be more accessible to engage in other intervention practices, such as our collaborative problem solving, EMDR?
Okay, so possibly. So the issue is, don't think of it as a causal fixer. It creates a physiological state that certain things spontaneously emerge. So there are therapists who have contacted me who have had people who had dissociative disorders. And with SSP, the parts got together, literally. They got into a state where they could literally talk and integrate. And there have been a few of these, or I should say several of them. And if people are doing other forms of parts work, like internal family systems, the different parts literally have different autonomic profiles. So it then becomes very rational or reasonable that if you can turn on that a more integrative social engagement system, the other parts will start to come into it. So it's not, one can build models of this. And the answer is, think about really why people are dissociative, is a defense strategy that starts off with mobilization. Mobilization doesn't work. So the body goes into literally a total shutdown. And then if it's persistent, the body may just go into freezing, because shutting down has its own, I would say, risk to our physiology. And freezing is also metabolically costly. It's high sympathetic tone, and we're not breathing real well. And so the body does a certain adjustment. So I see dissociation as this really remarkable adjustment that maintains autonomic function in a more optimal way, but the body, I would say the mind, goes someplace else. So I think people are afraid and almost shameful of dissociation. And again, where polyvagal theory has been helpful in this world of severe adversity history is to say, don't be shameful. This is heroic. Your nervous system has done something quite remarkable. And likewise with people who are very effective appeasers, that is also a tremendous gift of a nervous system that even under great states of threat can appear to be engaging with sufficient apparent authenticity. But what we find out is with appeasers, their nervous system literally wears out. It gets tired and they get burned out. And I didn't realize that many performers were appeasers, because I couldn't understand, since I like to be, talking, and I don't mind cameras and stuff. I thought this would be a lot of fun. No, they hate it. They see the camera, they see the audience as predators, and then their body gives in. So there was an opera singer who engaged me and basically started to inform me and teach me about what appeasement was for an opera singer. And she literally found polyvagal theory to explain what had happened to her.
Wow. These are profound insights here. And you're probably not seeing the chat here as you're talking, all kinds of wonderful feedback. Just to share a couple here, you'll like this, I believe. Lauren says, "This is my jam. I'm eating all this up." Matches what we're observing with our clients, all the functional changes, progress we're seeing. Margaret says, "We're so lucky to have this wedge of time with Dr. Porges." I feel the same way. We're up against time here. I don't want to take more of your time. We are so appreciative of your willingness to join us and share your experience and your insights with us. I think our community is going to benefit tremendously. I would imagine you'll be seeing a bunch of folks from this community engaging with your community in the future as they try to integrate these concepts.
Appreciate that. Also, what I would like, if you can send me the copy of the chat, if you can download that and send that to me, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think we can do that. Jen, you'll help out with that, I'm sure. And we're going to take a few minutes of a break here, 5-minute break for the community, and then come back for a little bit of debrief. But we will let Dr. Porges go. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all that you do, and spending this time with us is really meaningful. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for welcoming me into your community.
Pleasure. All right. Welcome back, folks. I hope you all enjoyed Dr. Porges's presentation there. There was a lot packed in, which is why we wanted to make sure to have a little bit of a debrief afterwards, just to sort of recenter and come down from that presentation. It was a privilege to be able to have him join the community here. So just for 10 minutes or so, we're going to debrief together before we pivot to our next activity. I guess I'd love to start by just opening things up to ask you all if you have examples, for starters, of where polyvagal theory, whether you knew about it or not at the time as polyvagal theory, has impacted your practice of collaborative problem solving. And if you were wanting to share some examples of that, I think that might be a good place to start here. Ted, please.
Happy to get it going. Hey, everybody, nice to see you. I had some trainings from Deb Dana, who's a polyvagal informed therapist who's really made a lot of the theories accessible and actionable in a therapeutic setting. So I highly recommend some of her trainings. But one of the things that I've been working on doing is helping parents do what Deb Dana calls this polyvagal mapping, is essentially helping the parents that I work with understand where their state of ventral vagus is at, how they can access it on demand, on ability to imagine a particular image, a thought, a time in their lives that kind of evokes that sense and that body sense of feeling. So when I'm talking with them about the philosophy and how to embody the philosophy in the midst of a Plan B conversation, that's what I'm asking them to try to work on to access. So they bring all of their body, all of their nervous system to the interactions to really evoke and change some of that. So in general, I'm super curious for our community, what ways when we're teaching philosophy, how it's not necessarily only an intellectual exercise. How do we get people to really think that they're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time? God, I wonder what they're having a hard time with. Where do you feel that sense of empathy? Where do you feel that sense of like compassion or curiosity in there? How can you bring that forth to the interactions? That's where my mind has been, a little bit of my work has been.
And Ted, some of Steve's last, Dr. Porges' last comments about sort of how we interpret things like dissociation, I found that really helpful to be, thinking of the lens of actually dissociation is fairly heroic, right? That comment that he made, which if you look through that lens, really can engender more compassion, more empathy, and of course, then consequentially keep us more regulated as a result.
Right. Or when a kid shuts down in a Plan B conversation and is just like escapes, exactly. Goes and leaves. Yeah.
Seeing that through the lens of adaptive, being, an adaptation, useful one. All right. Kara, next, please.
Thanks, Stuart. I've had a chance to do some training of polyvagal theory and try to bring it to frontline staff who are all trained in CPS and very familiar with it. And I think it's really great at bringing to light what we're talking about when we're talking about dysregulation, because sometimes we get very used to trying to talk to kids when they're not necessarily in a place to talk. And I think bringing polyvagal theory in to the staff who are up to their elbows in the behaviors and acknowledging that those behaviors can be frustrating and challenging. And that's why we're here, that sometimes it's not the time necessarily for us to talk either. And that our very supportive, empathetic response can start before the Plan B conversation ever really does.
Yeah, great point. And it makes me think of what Randy in the Q&A said. Randy works with adults with severe and persistent mental illness and finds that they've struggled to get out of the fight and flight state themselves. And, that's something that I think we're needing to pay more and more attention to, which is, the state of regulation of the fill in the blank, parent, teacher, clinician, you name it. And the various things we need to do to take care of ourselves and keep ourselves regulated so we can stand any chance of being responsive in a relational way to kids who are struggling with their adaptations to this. Lauren, sounds like you love this. You're a fan.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to try to be coherent because I got dysregulated just being so excited and then wanting to share myself. We are trained in the Safe and Sound protocol that was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges through the Unite system. We've been using that for 5 years in our centers, and we work specifically with neurodivergent kids mostly who do have trauma because of being square pegs and round holes in the school systems. And especially post-COVID, just really got into a cycle of not trusting adults. And so the marriage, like I was so excited to hear that he was presenting, because how we are utilizing both the polyvagal theory and CPS, now, kind of fully ingrained in our systems, in our centers for about a year now. We're still working on implementation, but it is a perfect marriage of the brain and the body, speaking to the brain and the body. And we're a learning center. And so we're used to going after the brain, used to going after the cortex. And kids are coming to us more and more impacted and more shut down. And what the Safe and Sound protocol allows us to do is a gentle, like, re-emergence into the world, satiating that sensory system, satiating that nervous system, so that they can engage with us relationally. And then we can go in with our relational dosing, and then we can build a trusting relationship. And then we can start, having these Plan B conversations. But and it's just been such an amazing marriage, that's the way I'm using it, of therapeutic tools that, like, we're speaking to the body, we're speaking to all of those defense mechanisms that come up, so that we can, work with our students in a helping capacity, absolutely, and get them to engage with us. So we have seen profound changes in the most severe populations. And I can attest to that. Yeah.
Well, this is exactly why we wanted to bring Dr. Porges here to speak to the community, to see these synergies and what might be possible by combining approaches really and integrating. And I'll have another comment on that front in a sec, but maybe one more comment or thought here from Alicia. That'd be great. Alicia Myers.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, as I always do. I've been kind of a keyboard cowboy today, but it kind of makes me think about when I'm providing supervision for therapists and how we're the tool in the room. And when we're dysregulated, we're not going to be able to build a relationship, and how we a lot of newer therapists really have that expectation of, I'm going to be that safe place in that relationship that fixes this person, right? And it's like, you got to slow down. That's a lot of expectation on that. Like, and then practicing those regulate, relate, and reason, right? Like, you have to slow it down first. And it just makes me really think about how we have to check in with ourselves and that introspection when we're working on supervision and things like that, because oftentimes we just get ahead of ourselves and we try to do way too much too soon. So yeah, slowing things down is always
and
important.
again, there's a big theme here, which is paying attention to our own states and cues that give us a sense of where we are in our own state of regulation. And I'm noting in the chat here, Garnett is saying Porges and Perry and collaborative problem solving all make sense. Yes, and the last thought I'm going to leave you all with here when we pivot to our next section is, I hope what folks will do, though, is not just sort of embrace how these models complement each other, but also say to yourself, okay, but thinking through the lens of polyvagal theory, what does that add to my practice of collaborative problem solving? I think that's what community members are highlighting right now. It's not just, oh, wow, Dr. Perry, he's saying things that reinforce what we teach, but what can we actually learn from Dr. Porges that can enhance our ability to be helpful to kids and families in this work? So I think, the last question, which will maybe folks can let us know either in the chat or afterwards, is just, would folks like to continue some of this conversation, or other ways we can be supportive when we think about learning more about polyvagal theory and its contributions to our work. So thank you all for participating in that dialogue with him. I'm going to turn things now to my colleagues, Aaron and Chris, who are going to facilitate our next section, which is about community connections, which seems rather appropriate right now.
Sorry about that, rookie move, sharing the wrong screen. Give me just a second. All right, so after last year's conference, one of the pieces of feedback that we got was like, we loved everything and we wish we could have just had more time talking to each other, right? Like, we just want to connect with folks, see what people are up to, hear what people are doing. And we are getting to be a very large community, and it's kind of sort of difficult to do this in a super coherent way. And so we decided that this year we're just going to do some like speed mingling. All right. We're going to use the random breakout room feature and just pop you in a group with random people to talk about a couple of questions about sort of what's going on with your use of CPS. And yeah, all you have to do is chat. This says we do want a designated note taker. So we're going to have 3 quick little mingling sessions. The first 2 do not require notes. They're just kind of talking about what you're doing with CPS. But the final session is going to be, it's a question about kind of how we can better support you. So we would love to have a note taker for that session. I will give you that reminder though before we pop into session 3. So for this first session, you're going to be talking about just what have you been doing with collaborative problem solving over the past year. All right. And I'm not going to broadcast these prompts to the group because I want you to be able to see each other's faces nice and big instead of just tiny boxes while this is taking up most of your screen. So just keep it in mind, just what have you been doing with collaborative problem solving in the past year? So I'm going to open the breakouts. Because of the random mix feature, TK staff, you have been assigned to a group. If you want to join your group and kind of chat about what you've been doing with CPS, great. If you want to keep me company here in the main room, you can opt out of your breakouts, but that is for TK staff only. Everybody else, your expectation is to join your breakout room. So I'm going to welcome back everyone. Hope you all had a nice time chatting with your fellow community members. All right, so I'm mixing them up again. Hopefully you'll be with some new faces. We'll see, it's all random here. So hopefully you see some new faces. So the next question in our next breakout, just spend a little time, introduce yourself, but then spend a little time chatting about, are there any areas of practice that you're struggling with, either with your CPS practice, maybe it's implementation type stuff, that you could use some sort of support and feedback from your community members about, or if everybody's doing super awesome and isn't having any struggles, any areas where you're finding a lot of success. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and open these up. You out of that last one a little early, but I assumed everyone would appreciate a break before our next topic. So go ahead, take 5 minutes and be back at 55 after the hour.
So let's give people a chance to sort of log back in, turn cameras on, and just get a sign that folks are out there and ready to move forward here. So I am really, really happy to be here and really excited to see so many of you. My name is Margaret Johnson. For those who don't know, I oversee all of our DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work here at Think Kids. I also am a trainer, consultant, and instructor in the certification program. And again, so happy to see so many of you. And I am going to spend some time today talking to you about our DEI work. I'm realizing that some of you have been part of our community for quite some time, and maybe you've been around and sort of seen us as we got started on this journey. And some of you are newer to our community, so you may not have a lot of information about what we're doing in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to just first of all, let you know that what we're calling diversity, equity, and inclusion at Think Kids moving forward is actually the phrase belonging in action. That's our new word for it. This is something that we really put a lot of time and thought into thinking about what to call it and how to kind of make DEI our very own thing at Think Kids. So also, just thinking about the strategic plan that Stuart and Naomi were sharing earlier, we have been on a trajectory to try to really weave DEI concepts more directly into our work, not just in how we teach and train, but in how we interact with each other, how we make our model more accessible to diverse communities, and really just kind of ultimately practice what we preach. And so part of this trajectory has led us to where we are now, sort of looking at what do we do moving forward and what does this have to do with our work and with our community. And while we were sort of brainstorming names for what to call our DEI work, Stuart came up with this really beautiful quote that I feel is important to share with you all. So he said, you know, think us, think all of us, think about an equitable, compassionate world where everyone feels like they belong. At Think Kids, we really are trying to make this hope a reality, both on our team internally and in the work we do with our certified community and our partner organizations. Really, to me, this says it all. This is our goal. This is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? So we landed on this name, Belonging in Action. And the idea here is that when people feel a sense of belonging, they feel like they can be authentic, they can be themselves, their voice is valued and elevated, right? Which is something we're really trying to do. And then the word action is sort of like, this is a thing we're actually doing. We're not just talking about it. We're not just thinking about it sometimes, but we're really trying to bring in actionable work toward helping people feel like they belong, both through our model and about our model, and how we sort of grow our community of people that are learning and benefiting from this. So as part of that, we actually have a new set of guiding principles that we've developed. And the idea behind these principles is, you know, it's not like we want to have finite goals around, we're going to be very diverse and it's going to look like this, and we're going to be inclusive in this way. Like, yes to all of that, but ultimately we want a set of things that we want to consider as we move forward in our work. And this is true for us at Think Kids and for all of you in general. At Think Kids, it is important to us that we think about how we hold space within the services that we provide, right? So when we're teaching and training, are we considering these factors? You know, how are we presenting content in a way that resonates with a variety of audiences or learners? Are we collaborating with learners to understand what their needs are? We want to think about how we're interfacing with communities that we're trying to help and with each other in terms of our work with the certified community moving forward. And we want to think about, specifically at Think Kids, how our team interacts with one another and whether or not we're proceeding with our work in equitable ways, whether anybody is watching or not, right? So again, the idea here is to really put all of this into action and to practice what we're preaching. You know, if we're saying, let's go out there and be curious, not furious, and let's really think about how we hold space for people, like we need to be doing that in general as a community. So some folks have brought questions forward, wanting to know more about the connection between sort of DEI concepts and collaborative problem solving. So I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. And then I'm actually going to hand over the reins to one of our certified community members, Maria Eaton, who has been doing this work, you know, in a way that I think will resonate with many of you. So I'm going to let her tell you about the work that she's doing. And then we'll give you some time in breakout groups to kind of discuss the information you're hearing. And actually, before I do that, let me back up to these goals really quick. Principles, sorry, they're not goals, they're principles, guiding principles, right? I am in the process of compiling a bunch of information about DEI and CPS, and we will be sharing that with you after the conference. You will get a copy of these guiding principles, so don't worry about like having to maybe comb through them yet. And due to time, I'm not going to walk through all of them right now, but you'll be able to see them very, very soon, and you'll be able to hopefully reach out at that point with any questions or concerns that you have. So when we talk about the connection between DEI and CPS, like what is that? What does that mean? And what does that mean for our community as you think about moving forward with guiding principles around this? So we know that DEI literally stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we also know that it's an umbrella term that many concepts, you know, fall underneath. So one of those would be being able to recognize and acknowledge and honor the differences between us and other people. Right? It also involves kind of decentering ourselves. So whoever I am, whatever my identity is, like that's not necessarily the most important one. I need to think about other people's experiences and hold space for other people's identities and beliefs and everything that makes them who they are. It's also about building self-awareness. What is my impact versus my intent? How do I hold privilege in this world, and why does that matter, and how does that matter? How does that impact other people? It's about sort of being aware of your place in terms of systems of oppression in society, right? That not everyone is treated equal in our world. And it's about thinking about what's your place in that, you know, whether you're helping it or whether you're benefiting from it, or, you know, just really kind of evaluating that. And again, it's about exploring our own privileges, our own biases, and the ways that we are maybe oppressed ourselves. We're all kind of a combination of these things, and that we all have limits of understanding. Let's see, I talked about intent versus impact. It's also about, you know, DEI is really about helping people feel like they are valid for who they are, right? That's sort of the baseline of belonging, is like, you are who you are, I am who I am. And again, how do I validate and honor that who you are is important and deserves, you know, space. And maybe that is equitable space, meaning we have to take measures to create even more space for those that maybe have been marginalized. And it's part of that is about creating bridges to support folks who historically maybe have been devalued. So that's a very, very brief overview of what DEI is all about. And I wonder, you know, if we replace the term DEI with the word belonging, perhaps it will help us all, everybody here, see that clearer alignment with collaborative problem solving. So these things that I've you know, pointed out here, I wonder if those resonate in terms of collaborative problem solving to people, right? Don't we create bridges for those who tend to be devalued? Don't we build self-awareness? Don't we look at our intent versus our impact? There's a clear connection here in my mind, and I hope for you all too, right? CPS literally is belonging in action. It is a way, it is a method, it is a tool that can help people feel a sense of belonging, right? It is an actionable way to support belonging. So in our model, okay, we value empowering others. That is such a fundamental baseline of our model, right? We talk about competency, autonomy, and relatedness, right? That autonomy piece of empowering others and sparking internal motivation. We aim for equitable, safe connection, right? In that trauma-informed kind of way. We believe that people are the experts on their own perspectives and concerns. I'm never going to know what it's like to be you, and I can still hold space for you to tell me what that's like, and I can take it seriously and honor it, even if it's different from who I am and what I think, right? That's the whole crux of a plan B. And it's also part of looking at problems to be solved in a neutral way. You pull back and you say, well, what do I know and what don't I know, right? And allowing that person to be the expert on their own experience. We really do seek, honor, and pay attention to differences. We value differences so much in this model. It's such a baseline part of what we do. We also think of CPS as something we do with people, not to people, right? So we're really aiming for that balance of voices. We don't assume that we know what it's like to be somebody else. And we listen with compassionate curiosity, which is a statement that I actually stole from some folks I trained recently, where the idea is like, you're curious, not furious, of course, but you're also approaching with this compassion. You're really holding the space for that perspective. So this is our model. These are very important pieces of the CPS philosophy, right? We know, many of you, are familiar with this slide from our current training materials, right? That the goal here is to be open, curious, to not assume we already know, to not jump to conclusions, to look at the whole picture, right? To not just think about my place in it, but like, what is this like for somebody else? To recognize the difference, whether it's a power dynamic or whatever, between me and the person that I'm tasked with assisting with some sort of problem, right? It's about checking those biases, checking these assumptions. We also like to promote this idea, and these slides are straight out of our training materials, right? CPS is meant to be for everyone, okay? Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the way we teach it needs to be the same for everyone that we teach, that we have a model that we want to put onto other people? No, what it means is that for people to benefit from CPS, they do need access to training and support, and that training and support kind of needs to match, it needs to be maybe tailored to fit how they're going to learn it, how it's going to apply within their cultural context or their environmental, regional, those of you who are trainers or those that are teaching parent classes or doing coaching internally, we want you to think about how you teach it, train it, talk about it, promote it, build content around it, provide access to it. We want you to think about am I using examples that resonate with the audience that I'm training with my learners, right? We want you to think about the structure of like, when do you hold your classes or trainings and in what chunks of time? Like things like that can be tailored to really meet the needs of learners. We want you to ask us first before you tailor those things. And moving forward, we're going to think about like, you know, the best ways to kind of empower the community to take steps like that. But in the meantime, just really thinking about if we want it to land and we want it to be accessible for people, it is going to need to be adapted, right? That's very, very important. So a couple of the ways that actually, let me skip around here. In terms of what we are doing moving forward, you know, Stuart and Naomi explained the strategic plan that is unrolling next year. And a huge part of that is initiative number 3, right? So looking closer at it, it's to engage and collaborate with our certified community members and maximize their impact in their communities, right? So, you know, what does that mean exactly? Well, as Stuart said, we see you as credible messengers about your own communities. And as our community is growing and expanding, there are very diverse needs within that community. And probably the first and most important thing Think Kids needs to do is hear from you and gather information about what are the needs within your community. How are you feeling about what you have access to and what you're able to do? What do you wish you could do? And how would that make a difference in your community, right? Like if we're really trying to pass on some of this work and share with you and empower you, we really need to hear what your experiences are and, you know, factor those in. So we don't know exactly what the partnership is looking like moving forward, but we definitely are going to base it on information you provide us. So it means, long story short, we are seeking folks who want to help Think Kids more directly with our work. We're seeking your input. We know that your work within your communities is super important for Think Kids. We know that you are part of the solution and we can't do this without you. And this doesn't mean more work or pressure to take on anything you don't want to do, right? This is stuff, we're not saying everyone in the community needs to be out there doing more trainings or anything, but we know that many people want to and are 100% capable of that. So we want to, you know, again, partner more. So some of the key words to think about moving forward here, you know, this is about partnering with you. This is about supporting you and maybe having a platform for increased support. It's about engaging you more and just kind of changing what is the relationship like between Think Kids and the certified community and how is that going to change here? More engagement. It's about including you in conversations about what happens moving forward, empowering and connecting. Okay, so that's just a little tip of the iceberg about what's to come, and there will be more information about that moving forward. I also just quickly want to celebrate a couple things here that kind of lean toward where we're trying to head in terms of belonging in action and collaborative problem solving. And one is the Craft Racial Diversity Fellowship, which wrapped up at the end of 2023. And we have the following individuals that I want to give a shout out and celebrate the progress and all of the things that we as an organization have learned from them and improved about our system because of you and the work you did with us. So Kim Parker, Nicolette Ford, Vanessa Morales, all CPS certified. And then we have trainers Eleanor Forbes, Joy Harper, Lynn Casella, Maria Eaton, who you'll be hearing from in a moment here, Ria Elcock, and Tarina Lester, who is actually now hired and working for Think Kids as a per diem trainer. And we are so lucky to have her. We also have been doing a lot of work around our Spanish language translations. This is probably the #1 question I get asked related to DEI and belonging in action is like, when do we get Spanish curricula? And the answer is as soon as possible. We totally know how important this is. We do have software already available that can translate videos and recordings into multiple languages. So you should reach out to Jen or Sasha if you want help with that. We also have been getting professional translations in a universal Spanish that can then be tailored for regional differences in different populations of Spanish speaking folks. And Maria actually did our very first Spanish language training as a contracted community member with Think Kids in May of 2024. And we are so proud of that. It was such a huge success. We have these beautiful, I've got examples of some slides here, in Spanish. And then we also have brought Anel Garza, who's a member of our certified community, onto the team, who is now a trainer for Think Kids and will be providing Spanish services directly. More info to come on Spanish translation. There's so much more I could tell you, and I want to stop talking so I can hand over to Maria to tell you about her work. So with that, let me stop sharing, and Maria is going to share her slides, and she's going to talk about her experience doing this intro training for Lawrence School District, which is a partner organization that Think Kids works with, and what her experience was like, really tailoring that model for her learners. So with that, I'll hand it over to Maria.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Margaret, can you share my slides with the audience? I'm having trouble sharing for some reason.
Sure, yeah, no problem. How's that?
It's not allowing me to share. Okay. Oops.
Can you see my slides?
I can see your slide.
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Thanks, Margaret. My name is Maria Eaton. I'm a certified CPS trainer and an outpatient clinician. Being a therapist is my second career, but I have over 14 years of experience in the medical field, supporting the implementation of health education programs to the Latinx communities across the United States. In my practice as a clinician, I primarily work with families from minority groups, mothers in need of perinatal care, and children. It is important to know that I'm originally from Ecuador, so I identify as a Latinx, and I have lived experience as an immigrant. Next slide. Okay. This is just the agenda for today, and I'm just going to try to go as fast as possible through the materials. Next slide. All right, cultural attunement. So it means just being aware and sensitive of other people's culture. It involves understanding their values, traditions, experiences, and treating them with respect. Our roles are trainers. Cultural attunement allows us to understand our audience, the people we serve, cultivate a sense of safety, and minimizing misunderstandings, and ensuring that everyone feels included and understood. Some ingredients for that are empathy, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, knowing that our audience may have unique experiences that we have never had. Adaptability, like Margaret mentioned, just adapting the curriculum and the program to the target audience. Continuous learning, always being open to learn about other cultures, the differences, and recognizing that this process is forever evolving. We're always learning something new about different cultures. And then humility, cultural humility, acknowledging limits of our own cultural knowledge, knowing that we don't know everything about every single culture. One of the experiences I had is like when I first moved to the US, I'm from Ecuador, I had to learn about the Dominican culture, Puerto Rican culture, and being from the same Latinx background, I had to be open to learn about their values, work views, slangs. So that just to say that even within our culture, there's a lot to learn. Next slide. All right, so Lawrence, I just wanted to give a little brief background about the target audience in Lawrence. So it's a small town, approximately 89,000 residents, most of them from Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. Spanish is widely spoken. There's a low high school graduation rates, and the average income is below the poverty rates in the United States. Most of folks work in manufacturing, healthcare, education and the housing is, most of the people in Lawrence rent, like you see on the picture. Most of them live in multifamily homes, and family structures might include multiple generations in one apartment, multiple generations living together. So why is this important? Because as trainers, we have to know that blended families and extended families are going to be part of this process. The family dynamics and the culture, always evolving. As women have more access to education and opportunities, the dynamics have changed, but typically we're talking about patriarchal structures where men are the head of the household and women are the caretakers. A little bit of examples. When I did my internship at the Oliver School, I dealt with a lot of immigrants, family of immigrants that had fear of immigration and deportation. Families that were not able to write or read in their native language or English. So understanding the communities that we serve is essential to adapt the model to meet the specific needs and provide effective support. Okay. Have any of you had any experiences working with communities like Lawrence? Okay, so.
Yes.
All right. Yes. All right. So next slide. This is a slide that I incorporated into my parents' classes and the intro class for Lawrence. I knew there was a lot of difference between the Latinx culture and the model. So I wanted to bring that to the awareness of the audience. I wanted to make sure that they know I knew I understood them and I had walked the walk and I was willing to walk the walk with them. So this illustration is from the book of Sonia Sotomayor and from My Beloved World. And this is the idea of the familiar self. It means that the person identity and experiences are closely linked to their family and community. Sonia Sotomayor actually attributes all her success to her mother and her community, which reflects how the Latinx culture works, the collectivism, okay? So it's important to acknowledge that implementing the model is gonna bring some challenges into these communities. One is the respect for authority. So in our culture, children are told to just do what the elder said. Don't ask questions, just do it. Plan A, everything. And so when I present the model to parents, I said, look, I know we act like this. I know our culture is embedded into that philosophy, but these are the benefits of CPS. This is why we're doing that. And then the communication style. In the Latinx culture, we often rely on indirect communication, okay? So there's a lot of nonverbal cues, a lot of unspoken expectation, especially from the youth. So I bring this to the parents' awareness. I'm like, I know we talk, we're not specific. We have a lot of unspoken expectations, but the model requires to be specific, requires open communication and dialogue. Then 3, I bring up to the awareness, the stigma around mental health and how in our culture, it's better to hide all the issues than talk about, and how important it is to seek help to support our youth. And then collectivism versus individualism. Really finding the balance between, yes, we are giving voice to the youth, we are helping them and supporting them on building skills, but at the end of the day, it's for the benefit of the whole family. Is it for the benefit of all? So finding the right balance between those two. Then I bring up socioeconomic barriers, which is obstacles like limited access to resources, limited access to mental health professionals that speak the language barriers, financial barriers, and time limitations due to very busy work schedules. So all these factors can also be barriers to implement the model. Cultural mismatch, as I mentioned before, CPS approach might sometimes seen at odds with traditional Latino values surrounded by parental authority and discipline. And so I always highlight that this model improves relationships, support the skill building for the youth, and reduces safety risk. As we explore the model with the parents, I encourage them to and the audience to keep an open mind, to ask questions, to stay curious. And I also highlight that this approach has successfully helped so many families strengthen their relationships and support many children. And always go back to the philosophy that kids and parents do well if they can. Next. That's okay. So as Dr. Porges mentioned, the polyvagal theory provides valuable insight into how our nervous system impacts our behavior, learning, and social interactions. Our brains are always scanning for cues of safety through the nervous system. So in my clinical experience practice, applying the polyvagal theory became significantly impactful when engaging with clients with minority groups. When I started teaching CPS to Latinx parents, I knew that I wasn't going to just deliver the curriculum. I knew I need to do something more. I knew it was unrelatable to them. So I understood firsthand how essential it was to cultivate a sense of safety, okay? Particularly for individuals who have experienced discrimination and generational trauma. So I intentionally focused on generating a multisensory experience that create a felt of safety. Most of my trainings are on Zoom, so I had to really be creative with this. And as I integrated the polyvagal theory, I started witnessing something transformative. I noticed that the group anxiety rooted in the past experiences of marginalization began to ease. Participants began to be more comfortable. Parents started to ask questions. Some of the feedback I got in Lawrence was that some of the educators that took level 1, they said, this is the first time that I actually understood the model. The comfort in the group just led to a deeper engagement and development of meaningful helping relationships, which is what CPS is designed to foster. Our experiences are just there to remind us how important it is to approach this work with care, with empathy, and with the right tools, especially with communities where trust is difficult to build. Okay, so how did I incorporate the 5 senses? That's the next slide. All right, so first I use visual cues. So eye contact with the audience. I encourage the audience to have the cameras on for deeper connection. Positive facial expressions, always smiling to help co-regulate. With sounds, I actually play music before my training and during breaks, just to create a familiar environment. My tone of voice. I also use a lot of positive verbal cues in form of positive feedback. So if somebody participates, I'm always giving positive feedback to encourage them to even participate even more. If the training is in person, I make sure that the environment is comfortable, hands-on activity, even on Zoom. And the handouts, I try to translate them in Spanish so that they can actually have the option to either do it in English or in Spanish, but they're always more receptive to read the materials in their own language. If we were in person, the smells, flowers. Flowers are very common in our culture, so I'll bring flowers and then snacks that are appropriate to the culture. And here are some examples of the slides that I actually change with permission of the kids, of course. So this is the one about our culture, that's in Spanish. And then the next one is about the 3 options. The next one, I changed the picture for someone that looks like us. As I say, I identify as Latinx. So, and then next slide. The same exact slides that we have in English, just translated in Spanish. More cultural appropriate pictures. And you can continue. Yeah, that one too. I can keep going. I just want to pause on the skills, Margaret. So if you can just keep going. The model of the brain, everything was translated. And so on this slide, I actually, when I present to parents or educators, I spend a lot of time explain it because I have to match the level of literacy of my audience. So I know a lot of them don't know what the skills mean. So I give examples for each one of those so that they actually understand. Same thing when I do Plan B. I'm highlighting, okay, this is what we're practicing now. This is how active listening looks like. I have to really break down the information into small pieces for them to really grasp the concept. Next slide. Okay. And then music. So these are some of the songs I use. These songs are widely known in the Latinx community. The first one is my favorite. It's a song of hope and that everything is possible if we have just a little bit of hope. So I start my classes with that song and everybody it changed the moods of the audience immediately. Next slide. Okay. So then tips to enhance social engagement. Okay, so creating helping relationships, building rapport with the audience, adapt to the audience communication style. Like I said, in our culture, we use a lot of facial expressions, hand movements, so you have to match that. I also present as a parent. I present as someone that have actually struggled, and this is true, with children with challenging behaviors. I don't present as an expert so that my audience know that I know what they're going through. I lived it, and this is what works. And then also being mindful of our privileges and our own biases. All right, then some co-regulation strategies. Like I said, I encourage cameras on for better contact. I model calmness, open body language. And then with my parents, we actually do mindful exercises before the class just to practice co-regulation. As we know, a lot of parents need to learn how to co-regulate. They need to learn how to feel when they're feeling dysregulated and actually normalize taking a break and come back to it. Yes. And breathing exercises with parents. And we also use nonverbal cues for positive reinforcement. Okay, create a cultural relevant safe space. Again, mindful of our privilege, respect for cultural values and traditions. One of them is that in our culture, older children are expected to watch over the younger children. So being mindful of that, knowing that that's a norm in the Latinx culture and respectful of their family's decision. Be sensitive to the audience needs. When I teach parents classes, typically it's at night. And if the audience is tired, I try to cover as much as I can and then give grace of 30 minutes for them to ask questions, and whoever needs to leave, leaves. So just really supporting them and using a non-judgmental approach that supports inclusion. I also like to do surveys. I like to know what my parents are experiencing so I can provide examples that relate to them. In these communities, not eating vegetables is not going to be a good example to bring. It's going to be a little bit different, which I'm going to go over after this slide. I also include activities that increase participation of the audience, like interactive exercises. I design activities that are accessible and culturally relatable. Make the curriculum relatable to them too. Provide culturally appropriate examples, like I mentioned, and ensure that the content connects with the audience lived experiences. Explain Plan B and the skill building process in great detail. I spend a ton of time talking about Plan B and how is it that we actually learn the skills from doing Plan B. And then lastly, promoting community and support networks. When we teach in these communities, we're not just trainers. We are that reliable person that we may have to a support list of therapists, facilitating connections with the schools. And so again, keeping in mind that we're just not trainers, we're going to be that trusted sort of support. And the last slide. Okay. So the most common behavioral challenges that I see in this community. So school absenteeism that leads to academic and social challenges, physical aggression and behavior. So fights, bullying, and verbal aggression often stemming from understood trauma and environmentally stress. When I worked at the, when I did my internship at the Oliver School, I noticed that a lot of the anger from the youth was stemming from not understanding the language. These kids just came right from Guatemala or Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic, and they didn't know the language. And they used to get so angry just for not being able to understand their peers. Okay. Disruptive behavior in school, like I mentioned before, lack of respect for teachers, refusal to follow rules, and sometimes it's about language barriers. Family conflicts, behavioral issues related to family stress, including domestic violence and parental neglect. Mental health related behaviors, anxiety, undiagnosed anxiety, depression, emotional dysregulation, often leading to self-harm, isolation, and risky behaviors. And then behavior that are frequently connected with broader challenges like poverty, community violence, lack of resources, and discrimination, and really a lost sense of safety. And lastly, substance use. That's also a common challenge in these communities. Yeah, so I want to just thank you for the time and pass it on to Margaret.
Thank you so much, Maria. And I know there was at least one question in the chat about people wanting you to share your co-regulation activities. I don't know if you want to speak to that really quick now, or maybe share. Why don't you speak to that for a minute, or share later? Yeah, whatever.
So I can share them later, but one of the things I do with parents is just really try to feel your body and identify the signs of this regulation in them. So when they feel like maybe my jaw is getting tight or my hands are getting cold, I'm feeling dysregulated, this is the time where I take a break. I always encourage parents and youth to learn the signs of this regulation and ask for a break. And most of the times I also do one-on-one with because I'm an outpatient clinician, I do one-on-one. So I encourage everyone, take a break. Breaks are allowed at any time to regulate, to self-regulate.
Awesome. And more to come on all of this moving forward into our 2025 strategic plan, kicking into action, where we want more of this kind of work. This is so important moving forward, right? And we're so grateful for Maria, so grateful for our fellowship, which helped us connect with Maria. And we're excited to work with other folks in our community about these kinds of things moving forward, and to get that Spanish curricula up and running, which is going to take some time. Things are in process, but we've at least got the intro deck ready, and we have a couple other things in place as well. So again, thank you so much, Maria, for sharing your time and your expertise with us.
Thank you. And thanks for your opportunity.
You are so welcome. So we want to give folks a little bit of time just to chat about all the stuff you've heard about belonging in action here, and about what Maria shared with you, and kind of about, moving into 2025, what partnering with Think Kids More might look like. So I have some guiding questions, and we're going to put you in breakouts with a Think Kids staff, instructor facilitating this conversation. But want to give you a chance just to share, what did you learn today about the connection between CPS and DEI? What do you want to know more about? How do your own experiences compare to what you've heard here? How does this info impact you and your community? How does this info impact our collective work as a Think Kids organization? So let's go ahead and let's see. Still trickling in. Okay, I think we got everybody back now. So just really quick, in closing here, we don't have time to debrief this, and I know we probably could spend all day just talking about belonging in action and what it means with its model. But I wanted to just flag, moving forward, the idea is to for Think Kids to do better in listening and gathering information from you, and being available to help if you have questions or needs. Like a lot of people in my breakout were saying, we feel like we're bothering you all when we ask for modifications and stuff. And we want you to modify, we just want to know about it, and we want to work with you on it. So we want you to feel like you can get support, not just about your content, but like just in general. I do get people reaching out to me with questions about DEI, like if an uncomfortable thing happens in your training or parent class, or, you know, you're not sure how to weave this into what we're teaching. I would so love to talk to you. Like, please email me or email any of the team, actually. Like, everybody is at a point where they can definitely help answer those questions or direct them to someone who can. So please reach out and let us know. I am sending, after this training, of our Belonging in Action guide, which basically maps out the history of our DEI work at Think Kids, some updates on our current projects, which I didn't have time to tell you all about today. It's got some frequently brought up common questions and concerns that people tend to ask about DEI and CPS. It's got a glossary and a lot more stuff. So you'll be getting that. And again, we encourage you to reach out. And with that, I am going to, I think, hand it back over to Jen or Stuart, somebody for closing us up.
You can hand it over to Stuart.
Okay.
And you can stop sharing for now.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. Well, we find ourselves at the end of the day here. As I promised at the very beginning, this was going to be an action-packed day, and I hope it really has felt that way to you all. It's challenging over Zoom, although I have to say I feel a lot better about Zoom after hearing from Dr. Porges. So I hope you all do too. In a moment, we're going to, not just yet, but in a moment, we're going to flash up on the screen the link and the QR code for the survey, which we really rely on. We want to encourage you all to give us feedback here by taking the survey. We're always striving to do better and figure out ways that we can better support the community, and it's especially important heading into this next strategic plan. So please give us that feedback. I know our team takes it very, very seriously. So we're going to give you a few minutes to do that so that we close up on time. I just want to conclude the conference by saying that I have the same experience just about every year here, which is that I just find at this point, my heart swells with love for this group and pride for what we've all accomplished together. And knowing at the same time that in a way, we're just getting started as we gear up to reach literally millions of kids. And it is just so fulfilling and heartwarming to be a part of this community doing this amazing work. I want to thank you all for all of your contributions to the approach as it continues to develop, to the organization as we continue to build and change, to this community, and to how and where and with whom we do this work. I want to thank our team for putting on this incredible conference today. I want to thank our guests. I think, Maria, your work that you shared today and your phenomenal presentation was such a great example of what happens when we collaborate with, empower, support community members to maximize your impact and to make CPS available, as Margaret was saying, to everyone. So it was a wonderful presentation and such a great example to show the way that we can work together with community members moving forward. It's really phenomenal to see you all. Please take the survey now. And lastly, take care of yourselves so you can keep up the great work, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks so much, everybody.
The link is also included in the chat.